attorneys in their own right. Nicole DeBorder joins us right now, as does Brian Claypool. Nicole, the families of those who were, killed with this decision. That's not surprising. There are concerns, going forward about potential problems tonight when it gets dark. There's no way of knowing. We don't even see a hint of that right now. But their view that this was sort of like a stacked deck. What did you make of that?
That's absolutely not the case. This is the way the criminal justice system is supposed to work in terms of how a trial should proceed. A trial, whether or not this seems fair to them in hindsight, looking at the verdict, is supposed to be about the constitutional rights of the individual accused. And in this case, the judge did just that. He made sure that this trial was fair and just under the law, and he was held accountable because he had the trial.
So when you look at it, Brian, and at how the jury came to this conclusion, so much was read into their, 24, 26 hours, whatever it was, total deliberation during this week, that maybe they were trying to offer a decision or find Rittenhouse guilty of a lesser charge. Turns out that was not the case, and that did not happen, but that the pressure was on them because of the potential community response that, again, I stress, at least up to this point, has been quite measured and quite, peaceful. But how does that enter into a jury's thinking as they're meeting to discuss not only the fate of one man, but the impact it's going to have on the community?
Hey, Neil, it's great to be back with you. It's been an honor, actually, to be with you the last couple of weeks on this profound case. And your question is compelling. I felt yesterday that if there were any guilty verdicts, that a prime grounds for appeal would have been the failure to sequester this jury for the precise reason that you just mentioned, because this was an unprecedented case of political and social pressure. I mean, this justice system was used as a political playground to promote a social agenda, let's face it. And these jurors were actually the victims of that. They had to face, they could hear chanting, for example, outside the courtroom. They had to go home and hear about 500 National Guards people being, being assigned in case there was violence. They felt this immense social and political pressure. That's not how our legal system is supposed to be set up. But notwithstanding all of that, these jurors, Neil, were able to look through the lens of what was the evidence in this case based on Rittenhouse's testimony, the videotaped testimony, and this issue of self-defense. And I
Proud Boys, that there's video online of you punching a girl in the face, that you've been radicalized online to think that white supremacy is okay, then let's pray for congressional internships from here forward. But nothing surprises me, and don't be surprised if you see Kyle Rittenhouse walking the halls of Congress or being pulled out to campaign stops for various officials. This is where we are today. And then add to it the fact that the division over this verdict simply is a symptom of a larger ill, which is that we continue to lack trust in our institutions, and now particularly the criminal justice system.
Frank, Rev said this makes it more dangerous to be a protester. What do you think about that? Are protests going to become more dangerous because of the messages heard by this verdict?
I think that's true. I think we're already a heavily armed society. The FBI tells us they're breaking records with National Instant Check System for background checks on gun purchases. We seem to be breaking that record every single year, but now it's exponentially larger, and it's going to make law enforcement a much more challenging job. Assume everyone now is armed, not only with a handgun, but now with a long gun, and assume that every potential protest is going to result in some form of violence and shooting. And you've got a recipe for a very ugly situation already divided country. And I'll point out, it's going to be violent for either side and difficult for either side. Violence, arson, property damage, the whole environment that Kyle Rittenhouse at 17 found himself, chose to go into the middle of, none of that is acceptable. But if you like the idea of vigilantism, if you like the idea of citizens taking the position of cops and shooting people that they feel threatened by, stand by. It's happening now and may continue to grow.
Rev, I want to read some of what Frank is describing. This is in Politico, the lionization of Kyle Rittenhouse by the right. Well before he was acquitted on the 5 counts he faced, Rittenhouse had found absolution elsewhere. A wide swath of conservatives had turned his case into an example of a social justice system run amok, and Rittenhouse himself as an avatar for Second Amendment virtuosity. They treated the trial outcome as vindication, perhaps divine. Since Rittenhouse's arrest, legal defense funds have been formed in his name. Right-wing commentators have blasted media coverage for allegedly mishandling facts of the case. Memes depicting Rittenhouse as a hero or even Captain America have cropped up on Twitter, and T-shirts have been made with the silhouette of Rittenhouse shooting his gun with the words, "Don't tread on me" and "Free Kyle." Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz offered Rittenhouse an internship in Congress if acquitted. Of course, Matt Gaetz, we must say, faces allegations of child sex trafficking, but, you know, I digress. Rev.
I think that this is why I said to you that it is increased the danger. And let's add to this something that was revealed but has not been extensively covered, is that they found that when there was some violence in Minneapolis after the killing of George Floyd, some of them were right-wingers that did it to make it look like some of the protesters did some of the violence. I'm not saying some didn't, but they found, I believe it was 2 instances, where these were people that put on hoods and acted that way. And my fear as one that heads National Action Network, and we do a lot of protests, they can put people in your protest to bait these kinds of interactions, and a Kyle type can therefore then become a hero coming in with violence and solving a problem that was instigated by people that really wasn't on your side. There's all kinds of danger that comes out of the signal that happened today, and I think that we need to really talk about this openly and candidly. When you talk about him being offered a congressional internship, he becomes a hero because he stood up to what? He went to Kenosha looking for trouble. He was not in Kenosha in trouble. He went there looking for trouble. So how are you going to make someone who was the aggressor looking to do something, apparently not trusting that law enforcement could do it? So he's going to come in and do it himself, and then he acts like he was the one that was holding his ground. His ground was wherever he left from.
His mom drove him, and he bought a weapon. It's an unbelievable moment. I'm really grateful to have both of you to talk to about it. A programming note.
The right Medicare plan can help you save.
Minority groups are furious at both the GOP and the governor.
These maps are illegal and a perversion of justice that cannot stand.
Across the country, the fierce fight over drawing new election maps in the wake of the census favors Republicans who control more legislatures and governorships. And political analysts say the new maps alone could help them pick up the 5 seats they need to take back the majority in Congress. For example, explosive growth in principally the Latino population has given Texas 2 new congressional seats. But while Republican lawmakers say
the maps were drawn blind to race,
their new maps have white voters in the majority in 3 times as many districts as Latinos.
If we don't pay attention to this and we don't demand that Latinos are represented, we will find ourselves with no representation.
In Ohio, the Republican Party won almost 55% of the vote a year ago, but the new map could hand them 12 congressional seats, the Democrats 3.
The red wave is a-coming at you like a freight train.
North Carolina is about evenly split, but a new map would give Republicans such an edge, long-serving Congressman G.K. Butterfield will now not seek re-election in his once reliably blue district.
It's racially gerrymandered. It will disadvantage African-American communities all across the 1st Congressional District.
And in Georgia, where Democratic incumbents hold just 6 of 14 seats in the House of Representatives, the new map pits 2 of the Dems against each other. Democrats have certainly gerrymandered election maps over the years, and just having an advantage does not guarantee a victory. All of that is granted, but there is so much unrest over what is happening right now. Lawsuits are being launched all over the place, and the courts will almost certainly have the final say. Pam?
All right, Tom Foreman, thanks so much for that report. Let's discuss with our panel, and I want to start with you, Alice. Tom Foreman just laid out there the situation in Ohio, and the Ohio State Senate President told the
money added to your Social Security check up to 17.
Now that I think is the critical.
Freedoms are linked to the very way in which our strategic partnerships advance technological solutions, and we must never be left to rely on technology.
Fine, you can too. Call the 800 number on your screen.
Doesn't want to take sacks, doesn't want to throw the ball out of bounds. Do not, I repeat, Carson Wentz, do not YOLO in this game, man. Play with this structure. Hopefully the Indianapolis Colts can continue to assert themselves.
Had been exceptionally violent.
Have public meetings to get input before the lines are drawn.
How do you see it, Jamal?
Yeah, it's just amazing that it just happens to turn out that Black voters get disenfranchised in Ohio, or Latino voters get disenfranchised in Texas. It's just amazing that this is the way it turns out. So what we have here, not just in redistricting, because of course Democrats do it too, and people gerrymander, but redistricting, the voting rights law changes in Texas, in Georgia, it's like the Republicans are afraid of facing the voters. And so when you couple what's happening in Texas and in Georgia and the redistricting maps with what happened in Congress the other day with Gosar, where they're afraid to stand up against extremism, it's like the Republican Party is having this culture of cowardice that's starting to appear in their party, where they refuse to stand up and defend themselves, stand up for themselves, stand up against the former president, stand up against their base. They're just these cowardly lions that would love to have a spine.
Just real quickly, not to play whataboutism, but we've talked about many states that are Republican-led. Let's look at the Illinois map, run by Democrats in that state. There's a very strangely drawn gerrymandered district in the state of Illinois. No one's talking about that, but the point is the focus needs to be on following the population and making sure that we're not splitting up cities and voting precincts.
Again, it's not just redistricting. It's the entire Republican approach to voting, which is to keep voters from being able to have their say. It's cowardice. It's a culture of cowardice that we're seeing emerge in the Republican Party. It's a problem.
Okay, I want to go back to that with you, Alice, but first I want to take a deeper dive into Ohio because I want to show the maps that we have here. Let's take a look here. Washington Post reported that, quote, during his speech, even McCarthy acknowledged the outcome. Quote, I don't know that this speech is going to make a difference, McCarthy said just after 3 a.m. Now all eyes are on the Senate to see if it can deliver this historic win for President Biden. As the New York Times reports, the bill still has a long and difficult road ahead. Democratic leaders must coax it through the 50-50 Senate and navigate a torturous budget process that is almost certain to reshape the measure and force it back to the House if it passes at all. But even pared back from the $3.5 trillion plan that President Biden originally sought, the legislation could prove as transformative as any since the Great Society and war on poverty in the 1960s, especially for young families and older Americans. Joining our conversation, Jackie Alemany, Washington Post congressional correspondent and author of the Early 202 newsletter, and Jonathan Lemire, White House bureau chief for Politico, host of MSNBC's Way Too Early. I'm still not tired of saying that, and an MSNBC political analyst. Jonathan Lemire, I start with you. Big day.
Big day, no question, Nicole, and a day that some Democrats along the way had fears that would ever happen. But when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calls for a vote, as we know, that vote's going to pass, and that's what happened today. Now, you were right to caution. There are still lots of twists and turns ahead. The pathway through the Senate will be thorny. We know that Senator Manchin in particular, but others as well, have reservations about pieces of this. It's going to probably change in the Senate, have to get kicked back to the House for more modifications. But there is still hope, though, among all Democrats on both sides of both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, that this will indeed get done. And what a significant win it would be for the party, and in particular, the president. This is, of course, the centerpiece of his agenda, one that he has embraced to be as transformative, perhaps, as an FDR or an LBJ. That's really going to change the nature of government's relationship with its citizens and really help, particularly families, those in need. You're going to really give them, as the president likes to say, a little breathing room, a little extra cushion there to make ends meet. And it's one that Democrats feel, as they know, they face right now concerns about inflation in the supply chain, but they think that this, when it comes into effect, they believe, Americans will feel tangible results of this by early next year. That not only will help them in their everyday lives, but bolster the Democrats heading into the midterms.
We are often critical of the Democrats for not explaining what is in the bill. To be fair, that's on all three of us, too. So let me just take a second and explain what's in the bill. $555 billion for clean energy, $400 billion for free pre-K, $200 billion for the child tax credit, $150 billion for home care, $150 billion under the broad category of housing, ACA credits, $130 billion, $40 billion for Pell Grants, $35 billion for Medicare, and $90 billion for other. The package, and this is sort of pre-victory lap, pre-passage in the Senate, has 58% support. I think the Democrats' bet is that as people understand what's in it, things like universal pre-K and the child tax credit will only move those numbers up. Tell me where things stand this hour, Jackie.
Yeah, Nicole, I think Democrats are going to be fairly focused on this messaging hurdle that they have clearly seen resonate in the polls and addressed reporters this week. And that is that while the bipartisan infrastructure bill has been successful amongst voters, and the provisions in Build Back Better have individually been polled and been successful, the bill altogether, Build Back Better, has had some other problems. So I think you're going to see members go home, recess after getting this through, and they're going to try to recalibrate on the messaging front here. But as we've all noted, this faces a thorny path ahead. That is because of some recalcitrant members like Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, who have their own spending concerns, and they are concerns that have threatened to jeopardize Biden's campaign promises and pushing through his economic agenda. Kristen Sinema specifically has objected to Democrats' attempts to fund the package by raising taxes on the wealthy. Then you have Joe Manchin, who has sought to scale back Democrats' spending plans altogether, constantly, waving the red flag on inflationary concerns. He has opposed the party's attempts repeatedly to create new social spending programs, especially ones that are not being fully funded. So there is a messy month ahead that we are going to see play out in real time, just the way we just saw it all play out in the House this December.
John.
Votes were locked in no matter what that number was going to be. I don't think they would have held a vote in the absence of knowing they'd get it across.
You don't think that some of the moderates, I guess some of the people were wondering that the moderates in particular had made such a big deal of getting a CBO score. And to your point, I wasn't faulting the CBO, just saying that, wait a minute, now they told you that this isn't adding up and this isn't free and it won't add a dime to the deficit, and you're still voting for it.
Well, but we do have to go to the Senate and see what they're going to do. Now, what else did we learn from this? Well, we learned that lots and lots of these programs disappear after 1, 2, or 3 years, and that's what keeps the price tag down. And if you extend those programs for the full 10 years, suddenly this is $4.2 trillion in spending, and the deficit's $2.9 trillion over 10 years. Those are big numbers, and they're going to get attention in the Senate, and they deserve attention because the White House is saying, look, this is really important. It's going to fight inflation. It's going to bring women into the labor force. Well, how can it do that if those programs go away? They don't get it both ways. Either the programs are there for 10 years and it costs a lot, or they're not and none of those things happen. And so Senate's, they're going to recognize this and they're going to say, okay, we got to modify this bill. And those moderates in the House will then have to take another vote. And they'll have had a lot of time to ask, what is my tolerance genuinely for these deficits. Now that they ramrodded this through, but I've got to vote my conscience. So that's coming. And, there will also be time to sort through this IRS issue where the CBO very clearly laid out their methodology. It's on their website. Go read it. The administration, Treasury, you tell me where to find it. They just say it's 400. You should believe us. And so I have a lot of faith, for obvious reasons, in the CBO. They did their job. They informed the Congress about decisions that they're going to have to make. Senate's now taking that information, and we'll see what happens.
All right, you're referring to this IRS enforcement provision that cost $80 billion built into this. The administration says it's going to, yield about $400 billion in revenues and savings over the next decade. I believe the CBO had said something closer to $120 billion. Be that as it may, the process and the fact that the president was optimistic enough to say, this will probably be happening after Thanksgiving. I think he was referring to the Senate taking it up. But the timeline is pretty aggressive. Is it even possible to get it done this year? And I mean, even if it passes the Senate, going back to the House to fix what will be probably some substantial differences.
Let me think. The original deadline was Memorial Day, right? So
That's right.
That didn't prove to be hard. It's hard to believe that they would go to the Senate, modify it as they need to, get it back to the House, vote, send it to the president for a signature, when they have to raise the debt ceiling, fund the government, and do other things that are the bread and butter of being the Congress and the administration. So that's a very full agenda, and I see little chance that you'll see this piece of legislation turn into a law before January 1, 2022.
And, you've explained this math to me. The Democrats are going to need all those 50 senators, and the tiebreaker, what Kamala Harris said, there's not a chance that a Republican's going to vote for this. As things stand now, if you were a betting man, and I know you don't like to just, tout bets on TV, can this get done?
This can get done, and I'll be honest. I said at the beginning of the year it was inconceivable to me that Democrats couldn't coalesce around some piece of the Biden campaign platform and get it across the finish line. That every president gets one early in their first term. So I was sure it would happen. Now it's conceivable to me that they might not get to yes, and I'd say the odds are dropping below 50-50 as we move.
Wow. All right, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, it's great seeing you. If we don't chat again, have a great Thanksgiving, my friend. The former director of the CBO, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Bob Cusack of The Hill, the editor-in-chief there. Bob, I'll ask you the same question as we get to the Senate in particular and the role of Joe.
Posting in front of the right candidates. I love invite to apply.
Endorsement, that stamp of approval, that email went out shortly after he left the floor this morning praising McCarthy for his performance.
I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to live for the praise by carrier pigeon. What a life. Jackie Alamany, Jonathan Lemire, thank you for spending some time with us today. Up next for us, the giant leap toward COVID boosters for all adults in the U.S. Stay with us.
Bernie Sanders initially wanted a $6 to $10 trillion bill. He settled on $3.5 trillion, and now we're talking more in the $2 trillion, and that's the effect of Sinema and Manchin. And they're going to change this bill, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can actually get it done by Christmas. It's going to be tough.
A lot of people have criticized Joe Manchin, say, well, in the end, he always votes with the Democrats, but not before he's whittled down the price tag of something significantly, and people forget that. And again, Kyrsten Sinema, similar, though newer, to the United States Senate. So this inflation concern that's built out there, some people say the government spending will just make it worse. That did not seem to register with those who voted for this today. The president's made clear this will alleviate that far from making the inflation situation worse, this will actually curb it. What is the sense you're getting from the people you talk to about that argument, that this is the cure for that inflation, not the agitator?
I think it's a tough argument to make, Neil. I just think, and also we're going to have, I do think that Democrats are going to get something done at some point, whether that's before Christmas or before January 1 or early in the new year. But then we're going to see, okay, is this fixing inflation? This is not an argument that when they launched this legislative initiative earlier this year, they weren't talking about inflation because it wasn't that much of an issue. So I think it's a hard argument to make because the United States has spent trillions of dollars and a lot of it necessary for COVID, and now they're spending trillions more. And it's not COVID, so I think the Republicans have the advantage on that argument.
Real quickly, on the president, the poll numbers, and the vice president, her poll numbers, the White House has been arguing that when this gains traction and the response to the infrastructure-only measure that's out, about a week now, that those will turn around. We've seen little evidence of that with the infrastructure package. What do you make of their argument?
They're certainly hoping, and hope is not a strategy, but at the same time, they've got to implement this law when they get it done, both the transportation bill and this social spending bill, whenever it gets done. And remember the Obamacare website. That was a disaster. They've got to avoid implementation disasters. And then the American people, whether they spin it, both sides are going to be spinning, this is good, this is bad, but the American people are going to decide, do these laws, have they helped my quality of life? And then we're going to have the election. We'll find out.
Yeah, then we'll know then. Bob Cusack of The Hill, the editor-in-chief. We have a lot more coming up, including the latest from Kenosha, where all things are quiet after this.
This program is brought to you by Liberty Mutual Insurance. Only pay for what you need.
Not speaking out, which is what most organizations that are so hungry for the massive Chinese market and the billions of dollars there, trillions of dollars that are available, they're not speaking out. But this is different. And will this lead to change? That is the big question, Pamela. But of course, the most pressing question, where is Peng Shuai? Is she okay?
Will Ripley in Taipei, thank you. And coming up, we end the week with a White House tradition that's all gravy.
Power vested in me as President of the United States, I pardon you.
They are a beautiful idea.
Pfizer and Moderna's COVID boosters for all adults. The decision comes hours after the FDA authorized the boosters this morning. COVID boosters are expected to be immediately available to all adults as soon as CDC Director Rochelle Walensky signs off on the broader use. However, a number of states and cities did not wait. They have already begun to allow all adults to receive boosters in the past weeks. Let's bring into our coverage MSNBC public health analyst Dr. Irwin Redlener, the founding director of Columbia University's National Center for Disaster Preparedness. When President Biden called for boosters for everyone in September, at that moment, it seemed like the CDC and the FDA were out of sync with where this was heading. I know lots of people all over the country, from Nevada to the Midwest to New York, who've already had their boosters. Why does this feel like they're sort of following?
Well, what's happening now, Nicole, is that it was clear for many, many months that, as you said, that we're going to be, all of us, heading to getting booster shots. Many states did rush ahead of the formal federal announcement, but now I think we're all going to be in sync. And the idea at the end of the day is that if you're 18 years of age or older, you should be getting your booster shot. And the booster shot could either be the same vaccine that you had originally, or it could be one of the other vaccines. It doesn't really matter as far as we know. So that's where we are. And as a matter of fact, I think this won't be the last booster shot we'll be talking about. And I'm pretty sure that a year from now, we'll be having, at the latest, we'll be having the same conversation. And we'll probably be needing regular booster shots for this virus that's not going away anytime soon.
It's not going away. It is, in fact, in parts of Europe surging. I saw on the New York Times website last night, cases in the U.S. are up 33%. What should people do for Thanksgiving and the Hanukkah and Christmas holidays? How big is too big?
Yeah, we have to be on the alert, Nicole. And I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, it seems like decades ago, the red line have 25 or 30 people over for Thanksgiving. Last year, 0. And now this year, we're having a modified celebration of those holidays. And what I mean by that is that nobody's coming here that is not vaccinated, except for children who are not eligible. And those children should be tested. Anybody at risk in your party, in your gathering, should be tested. And the testing idea is actually a really good way for those people who have not been vaccinated to make sure they are where they should be. Unvaccinated people should wear masks and should try to keep the windows open for increasing ventilation. And, let's not create a day out of it. Let's have people over. Let's do our thing with vaccinated people, and then it's time to go home. It's a kind of a reduced version of the gigantic celebrations that some of us are used to, and we just have to be cautious and vigilant right now that we're not doing anything just because we're tired of COVID, which we all are. It doesn't mean we could let our guard down.
And how we've talked about the kids' vaccine for many, many months now. How are you feeling about what you're seeing in terms of the numbers of kids 5 to 12 that have already been vaccinated?
Well, I think we have to get all of our children vaccinated. Now, originally it was 12 and up, and now it's 5 to 11. I think we're making, good progress on getting children vaccinated, but we really have to keep pushing. I mean, the more children, the more people in general that get vaccinated, as you know, Nicole, gets us closer to this magic number of herd immunity, whatever that number might specifically be. But we know it's a lot more people have to be vaccinated in America to get ourselves closer to being able to say that the population is protected. So it's good progress. We've seen essentially 0 serious complications in children so far. And I think we just have to keep going forward. And parents really should feel reassured and comfortable that the vaccine's working. Kids, it's a reduced dose for them, the 5 to 11-year-olds, and it's a safe vaccine. So let's keep up the pressure and let's make sure our children are protected as much as we can.
The gravy train of jokes to boot.
Instead of getting basted, these two turkeys are getting boosted. Turkey is infrastructure. Peanut butter and jelly are going to help build back the butterball as we move along.
Sources say the turkeys were afraid they'd be gobbled up when they heard they'd be retiring at Purdue University. But there will be no coop because there is no connection between the university and the Purdue Poultry Processing Company, in case you were wondering. And in our out-of-this-world lead, there could be someone else out there. Well, NASA is about to launch a new telescope that it hopes will answer questions about life on other planets. As our Kristen Fisher reports, the new CNN film, The Hunt for Planet B, takes a look at this historic mission.
The Hubble Space Telescope has been beaming back images, transforming our understanding of the universe for more than 30 years. Now, its successor, a telescope 100 times more powerful, is just weeks away from launch. The James Webb Space Telescope is designed to answer humanity's most existential questions. Are we alone in the universe? And where did that first light in the cosmos come from?
I think its greatest discoveries are going to be answers to questions that we have yet to ask or imagine.
Webb's deputy project manager, Paul Geithner, was hired by NASA 30 years ago to help fix Hubble.
It was the mechanical version of eye surgery. Endeavour's 11-day fix-it mission in space was to install corrective mirrors so the nearsighted and nearly $2 billion Hubble Space Telescope can do what it's supposed to do, see.
But once in space, Webb can't be repaired by astronauts. It will be too far away, orbiting the sun at a distance 4 times further away from Earth than the moon. The telescope is also so big, about the size of a tennis court, that it can't fit on top of a rocket fully intact.
We had to design it so it could be folded up and then unfold in space. So it's the origami observatory.
With more than 300 single points of failure, and each one could prove to be fatal to the mission's success.
We wouldn't have built a telescope this big unless we needed to, and you need to build a telescope this big if you want to look at the very dimmest, most earliest galaxies in the universe.
Webb will be launching on a European rocket from French Guiana, a nod to the telescope's international partners, Europe and Canada. But just getting to this launch pad has cost nearly $9 billion more than initially projected, and it's about a decade overdue.
Was there ever a moment where you thought, man, I just don't know if this is going to happen?
There were numerous existential crises, both technical and programmatic, through the life of the mission, but I guess we're all eternal optimists, and we persevered and made it happen.
Kristen Fisher, CNN, Washington.
The CNN film, The Hunt for Planet B, premieres tomorrow at 9 p.m. only on CNN. And on Sunday, be sure to tune in to State of the Union. Among the guests, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Virginia's next Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, and candidate for Texas Governor Beto O'Rourke. That's at 9 and noon Eastern. I'm Pamela Brown, in for Jake Tapper. Our coverage continues now.
Happening now, breaking news. Kyle Rittenhouse is found not guilty of all charges after claiming he fatally shot 2 racial justice protesters and wounded another in self-defense. We're getting new reaction to this polarizing verdict. Another major story we're following, President Biden's landmark spending bill is approved by the House of Representatives after months of delay. The nearly $2 trillion centerpiece of the president's agenda now faces serious hurdles in the U.S. Senate. And CDC vaccine advisors just endorsed COVID-19 booster shots for all Americans. We could get a final decision from the agency's director at any moment. Stand by. We want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And let's begin with our coverage tonight with the very latest on the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. I want to go straight to our senior national correspondent, Sarah Seidler. She's just outside the courthouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Update our viewers, Sarah.
There was relief on the part of the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse, and disappointment on the part of the prosecution. It was a dramatic day in court when the jury read all 5 counts and came up with not guilty verdicts. Here's what it looked like in court.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum. We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Bridget McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
The reaction there, you see Kyle Rittenhouse becoming unstable. He sort of falls onto the desk filled with emotion. His mother, I heard her gasp. I was in the courtroom as this was being read, and then eventually her head fell into her hands and she appeared to be crying. There were also family members of those who were shot and killed that day and injured. Them very upset with this verdict, feeling like justice was not done. But for Kyle Rittenhouse and his attorneys, they were pleased with this verdict, though it took about 25 hours for this jury to deliberate and get through to this not guilty verdict. Here's what Kyle Rittenhouse's defense attorney had to say about the verdict.
It's been a long 3 weeks. We're very happy with the verdict. We're happy that the jury took the time, put in an incredible amount of effort. There were times we doubted the case. There were times we were confident. And to say that we were relieved would be a gross misunderstatement.
The star evidence in this case for anyone who was sitting and watching the trial really was the video that was taken, not only from those who were on the streets that night, live streamers showing Kyle Rittenhouse and his actions that night, but also from a very clear high-definition drone video that the jury requested to look at, and they did re-look at that evidence after the case was done. We do know that there has also been reaction, as you might imagine, from the prosecutors in this case. They said that they were disappointed, but that they respected the jury's decision, and they wanted to make sure that others respected the jury's decision as well. This means that Kyle Rittenhouse is a free man at this hour, a person who is relieved, though his attorneys say that he is suffering from PTSD from all this and hasn't been sleeping and has been getting counseling. As for those who lost loved ones, they are furious about this verdict and they feel that justice was denied their loved ones. Wolf?
What's it like, Sarah, outside the courthouse where you are?
You know, this is the calmest it has been in all the weeks that we have been here, the 2.5 weeks of this trial. There was a little bit of arguing going on outside as soon as the verdict was known to the public. You had the uncle of Jacob Blake, Justin Blake, out here. He'd been here every single day of the trial. But what ended up happening in the end is that it dissipated in the last couple of hours, and there are far fewer people on those court steps than there have been in the last 2+ weeks. Wolf?
I want you to stand by, Sarah. I'm going to bring you into this conversation. I also want to bring in defense attorney Shan Wu and CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. Shan, not guilty on all charges. What's your reaction to this verdict?
Not surprised, Wolf. I really think this case offers us a glimpse and a reminder of everything that's wrong with our criminal justice system. The prosecutors here did themselves no favors. They had a lot of self-inflicted injuries. Yeah, I think starting right off the bat, why did they even choose to try it in a small community that was obviously impacted by these demonstrations and even riots? They had an uphill battle. The judge was very difficult for them, even appeared to demonstrate bias. But I think the real takeaway here is all the things that are wrong with our system, and those need to be paid attention to.
Well, let's follow up. Ellie, what do you make of this verdict? Would you have expected Rittenhouse at least to have been found guilty on some of those lesser counts?
No, Wolf, I would not have expected that, and I found this jury verdict to be not surprising. At its core, this case was about two things: the law of the state of Wisconsin and the facts of this particular case. And that's by design. Our criminal justice system is supposed to take this kind of decision and insulate it from any politics, any emotions, any outside influences. And all indications are that's just what happened here. And an important point to keep in mind here: the law requires the prosecutors in this case to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high bar. And so if the jury found themselves back in the deliberation room and they said this is a close call, that's it. That's reasonable doubt, and that leads to a not guilty verdict. And that's what we saw today, Wolf.
You know, Sarah, the shootings unfolded at the height of the racial justice protests last year over there in Kenosha. Does the community feel there's still a very long way to go to see racial justice right now? What are you hearing?
There is a sense that there has been justice denied and that there are two different justice systems, one for black Americans and one for white Americans. But that has been said throughout this because that is coming mainly from Justin Blake, Jacob Blake's uncle, who was very disappointed that the officer in that case, that, by the way, was the precursor to the protest, the reason for the protest that turned to riots in the first place. That has been a thread throughout all of this, and this is just another moment in that belief for some people. For others, I think Ellie Honig hit the nail on the head. It was about the evidence in this case. It was about the details of this case, not the details of what people think or believe or want to believe, but the details in this case. That is what the jury had to work with, and they worked with it for 3+ days. They looked at it, they went over it again and again, and they deliberated for more than 25 hours over the past 3.5 days. In the end, there were a lot of things that were learned in trial, Wolf. We learned that the AR-15 style rifle, it turned out, actually was possessed legally by Kyle Rittenhouse, even though he was 17 and a minor, because the measurements of the gun matter in the laws here in Wisconsin, and it was under the specific measurements that allowed him to possess it. The prosecutor clearly did not know that or did not look into that because it was one of the charges, and then eventually a charge the judge ended up dropping in this case. We also learned that Rittenhouse was staying at his father's home, and there are other family members here in Kenosha. The night of this, he was here staying with a friend, so he didn't come into town with this rifle from Illinois, where he lives with his mother. He was already in town. The rifle was already here in the state of Wisconsin at his friend's family's home. There were lots of different things that we learned in this trial and that the jury learned and then took back back, looked over all of the evidence, and came up with a not guilty verdict. And in this country, you cannot be tried twice for the same crime once you are acquitted. So he is a free man tonight.
Yeah, no double jeopardy, as they say. You know,
luck this weekend, an arts and craft fair is taking over the Premier Center over in Sioux Falls.
And temperatures are a lot warmer today than they were yesterday, but we do have a chance for some sprinkles and even a couple of flurries for tomorrow. We'll talk about that in your First Alert forecast.
And we've got some trouble brewing for coffee lovers. Why your next cup of joe may cost you a little more. That's up after the break.
Get the latest news now, every weekday morning on Dakota News Now.
To say neighborhood until Miss.
But also to create this municipal infrastructure that really challenges the validity of certain votes that some people do not want counted. And we know that that's not in the spirit or the interest of democracy. And again, just as that New York Times story said, this is being done on a completely evidence-free basis.
I mean, that is a generous... Go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, just one thing really quick on that. And, you know, since I'm back to my Republican hair, I can give Republicans advice again. Look, here's the crazy thing about what Aaron's just saying. Like, not only is it's obviously corrupt and anti-democratic, right? We've talked about that. But it's stupid, actually, logically. In Wisconsin, the biggest batch of people who don't show up to vote are non-college white voters. Yeah, white voters who don't have a college degree. Who are they voting for in the last election? Donald Trump. So not only is it corrupt, do they feel like they have to try to cheat to win? Not only is it anti-democratic, I actually don't think it's a good strategy, right, in the long term for Republicans. They've bought into this BS that more voting is good for Democrats, which isn't even necessarily true. So it's stupid in addition to being corrupt.
Well, no one ever accused them of being smart autocrats.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's true. I spent the afternoon talking to Chris Krebs for the next episode of the Hell and High Water podcast, and you know, they asked us to just put out this report on information disorder and how messed up everything is, and we had a long discussion. A couple things that he said that really resonate with something you just said and something Aaron just said. One of which is the notion to what not a bookend, what January 6th was and what the insurrection was he's like, it's an A/B test is what that is. That's when you're running an autocratic playbook. What you're doing is you're testing out which conspiracy theories work and which don't, which lines have traction, which don't. You're A/B testing. If this fails, it's not a failed coup. It means you've learned now what works and what doesn't work. And what's now happening is the logical extension of that, which is the big lie, is the argument that now has kind of emerged out of that. It's the next logical step in the progression. And you think about to the point about Wisconsin, you know, if you remember back in 2016, Wisconsin was a state that did not vote for Donald Trump in the primary. Republican voters in Wisconsin in 2016 voted for Ted Cruz. And the argument among the Charlie Sykeses of the world, if you went up and hung out, my dad was from Wisconsin, I know Wisconsin pretty well. Republicans up there were not Trump, they were the least Trumpy Republicans in some ways in the country.
They were Paul Ryan Republicans.
They were, yes, and even more moderate than Paul Ryan in a lot of cases. And the fact that the Republican Party in Wisconsin has gone this bonkers, you like to say bat bleep. I'm not sure I can get them. It's like always like,
I just got in the wrong place.
I know, it's always beep, bleep, beep, bleep, yeah. It's really a sign of how pervasive this is, because if those Republicans are embracing these kind of tactics, it means this is not the craziest end of the Republican Party by any means. It means it's seeping really deep into the soil of republicanism in a way that's just, you know, is in fact kind of setting us up. And the last point that Aaron made, I think, a point that Chris Krebs was making, I asked him at the end, I said, is Trump fired you? Trump's clearly a cancer, has been a cancer, was metastatic. But is this now not about Trump anymore? And he's like, no, this is not about Trump anymore. Trump is a problem, but Trump is not the problem. The problem is that this stuff is now out there, and it's in the party, and it's alive, and it's its own metastatic cancer that's kind of operating on its own volition now, and that's what we really have to deal with, is that problem. And this Wisconsin thing is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, I mean,
friendly people. Closed mostly lower on Wall Street today, though tech gains for several tech companies pushed the NASDAQ composite to another record high and its first close over 16,000 points. Today's final numbers: the Dow down 269 points, NASDAQ up 64, and the S&P 500 down 7 points. The Defense Department has solicited bids from several major tech companies for cloud contracts. Companies include Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Oracle. The new push comes after the Pentagon scrapped its plans for a single vendor cloud contract for Microsoft, worth up to $10 billion over a decade. The value of the new contracts is not known, but the Defense Department estimates that it could run into the multiple billions of dollars. Coffee futures have jumped to the highest level since 2012, causing panic in the financial market. Part of the problem is severe drought and frost conditions in Brazil, which is the world's largest coffee supplier. The Consumer Inflation Report shows there is some good news, though. Although coffee prices are rising, they haven't increased as much as other items. Starbucks and other companies buy far in advance, which allows them to keep prices in check for now. I feel like today's definitely a coffee or like a tea kind of day. Just a little cloudy, dreary. Kind of wish I would have gotten to see the lunar eclipse. I saw a bit of it, but it was really brief because that cloud coverage was pretty thick last night.
Yeah, cloud cover kind of arrived at the worst time.
Yeah.
You know, last night, stuck around through a good majority of the day today, and it's going to continue tonight too, which ironically, we will at least keep some of these above normal temperatures sticking around for the day tomorrow too. But right now, most of the upper Midwest still about 5 to near 10 degrees above normal. Won't be quite as dramatic for Saturday, and we are going to be cooling down on Sunday as a cold front makes its way through. So more notable in North Dakota, not quite so bad in the immediate Dakota News Now viewing area. But then watch what happens as we begin next week. All of a sudden, the warmer than normal temperatures begin to return, especially in central and western South Dakota, and we're really going to notice that on Tuesday as we lead up to Thanksgiving. But just in time for the holiday itself, we are going to be cooling back down and getting back below normal, which on Thanksgiving, normal high should be in the lower 40s. So we are going to be certainly well below that. Cloud cover making its way back in, really hasn't left since it arrived last night. Going to continue throughout the rest of this evening. Temperatures for the most part are in the 40s locally. In western South Dakota and western Nebraska, the 50s can be found, and the wind is beginning to get a lot lighter. Still pretty breezy, though, in parts of Minnesota and in Iowa. Not a bad night temperature-wise, kind of falling.
Attacks. Depicts suffer sudden breathing problems.
Through a city like a Kenosha, leaves death and destruction in its wake, and then everybody else is left to pick up the pieces. Kyle's crying, the city's now in debt because they're places of work are burnt down, and the country's like at each other's throat over racial animosity. Meanwhile, there's no black guy involved in the shooting. Yet Al Sharpton releases a statement today and says, you know, it's just another reminder of, you know, black Americans being shot. No black American was shot by Kyle Rittenhouse. And that's what people think still to this day.
Can Kyle Rittenhouse sue a sitting president for statements that he made when he was a private citizen and a candidate?
That is what Lynn Wood, Kyle Rittenhouse's prior attorney, aimed exactly to do, because at that time, obviously, it was before he was sitting, and Bill Clinton taught us that, yes, you can sue a president for acts prior to assuming the presidency. I have to point out that, you know, to your point, Biden used that in a campaign ad to galvanize support and votes, to play into the lie that you were talking about earlier, that arson and looting and violence is peaceful protesting, that rioting is peaceful assembly, that this trial was somehow good versus fascism and racism and white supremacy. And the governor of Wisconsin furthered that today in his statement when he said no verdict will be able to bring back the lives lost, no verdict can heal the wounds or trauma experienced by Jacob Blake and his family. No mention at all of the sacred duty that jurors hold, no good job to the jury, no anything of that. The DA's office weighed in and said certainly issues regarding the privilege of self-defense remain highly contentious in our current times. To your point, all this is a narrative, a ball that was being batted around the nation the entire time, and it was created by and amplified by the media, elected officials, politicians, reporters, social media, and the like, and there has been absolutely no accountability for it, no responsibility, even far after all of it has been debunked. But we're going to continue hearing that. We will never have the truth brought to light of this trial. It will never be covered fairly, no matter what, because this is being furthered, as we just saw, by the president, and as we just heard, by the vice president as well.
So obviously, burning things down doesn't work. Destroying businesses, vandalism, theft, none of that works. It doesn't make anything better. If you look at the state of crime and police departments being refunded, I know we're going to talk about that later in the show. So what can Kenosha do now?
Well, I think Kenosha's already doing it. If you pay attention to what's happening on the ground in Kenosha, the people of Kenosha are coming together. They've rebuilt their community. They really are working hard to move past both the shooting of Jacob Blake and this Kyle Rittenhouse case. But where I take issue with what Emily's saying here is, this idea that we can move beyond it, or this idea that the media is not doing a good job. There's a lot of reporters who've been covering this case from day one. Sarah Seidner is one of those reporters who today said, when she said what Joe Biden said about white supremacy, that's a lie. It was debunked. It was completely debunked. And so there's a number of good journalists who have been on the ground in Kenosha from when the shooting happened until this verdict was rendered that have been covering this case both fairly and accurately, and they're worthy of getting the praise that they should for covering this the right way. Because to cover this trial correctly, you have to cover what's actually happening in the courtroom and cover the backdrop in which this case is happening, which is a backdrop in which for a lot of Americans, especially black Americans, they believe there's two different justice systems. And until you have part of that lived experience and understand why they're upset, even though it doesn't play into exactly what's happening in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, you don't understand their anger.
There was a case in Texas, I could be wrong, so like last month, where one of these high school kids, I think, killed someone with a gun, and he was just out on bail the next day. And people say, oh, there's, different levels of justice. I can throw another case right back in your face. It doesn't have anything to do with race, Richard. This case has nothing to do with race inside the courtroom. You can make up a theoretical case to prove your point,
no, I could talk
but that's just not true.
I could talk about Julius Jones, who was convicted, who was murdered.
Okay,
OJ got off. Okay, OJ got off.
I know that people forget about this, but Jacob Blake was a good shoot, right? Right? You gonna agree with me? The guy was holding a knife.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
and the officers were exonerated.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
He was shot in the back.
Oh my God! It's so sad because he was holding a knife, trying to kidnap a woman and her kids. That's what police officers do.
He was shot in the back 7 times.
The DOJ determined
he was
that
trying to harm a woman. If you're okay with that, I guess you're okay with that. All right. I find it ironic, though, that Biden woke up from his colonoscopy to this verdict. His ass literally got handed to him. Lawyer up, Joe, because that kid better sue your butt.
He should sue everybody who...
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It's interesting. If this shoe were on the other foot, there would be an impeachment proceeding.
That's not true.
President Trump would single out
Central Park 5.
President Trump what are you talking?
President Trump put a full-page ad against Central Park 5.
There was no president who went after the Central Park 5. Joe Biden singled out a person, a citizen, influenced the case, called him a white supremacist. I will put it on this. Biden is probably not in control of his words or his faculties. Clearly somebody else is pushing this stuff, and I do believe he's not following the case. Somebody else is doing it. But, if the argument about this, no blacks were shot, these were white men, they will come back at you and they will say, activists will say, well, they were defending blacks.
Yeah, the guy that used the N-word. The guy that used the N-word.
Yeah. Do you want those to be your defenders? A pedophile and a domestic abuser. Do you want that to be your shield? What a stupid argument.
Yeah, people had to choose between Kyle Rittenhouse or Joseph Rosenbaum. Like, who would they choose to defend them?
But no, I'm sorry, but he stood with a Proud Boy. This guy just anally raped boys.
On that uplifting note, up next, Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty, but that's not stopping the media and Democrats from still smearing him. That's coming up.
Women also host Montana on Thursday at noon, followed by volleyball that evening with the fight.
Angie's List is now Angie, and it's easier than ever to get your project.
Went on the floor when this was finally done in the morning hours today. So they now have something they can take to the voters if they get it through the Senate. And again, no votes to spare. They just have to learn how to sell their story and how to tell their story to the American people about what they are trying to do for them.
Yeah, the Democrats were all very, very happy, applauding, screaming, standing up. The Republicans were all sitting, as you can see, one side versus the other side. David, the president will need to get some moderate Democratic senators on board to get it through the Senate. Then it's going to have to go through the House one more time. How much of an uphill battle in the coming weeks is he facing?
Well, it's going to be complicated. Let me say first, Wolf, if you're going to have a physical, there's no better way to lower your blood pressure than to get a really big vote out of Congress. So good for him. It was a really big win, and I agree with Gloria. Nancy Pelosi is a master at this, and I experienced it myself when I was in the White House. But she puts these things together like a Rubik cube, and somehow she always manages to assemble it. It's not going to be as easy in the Senate. Manchin and Sinema, and particularly Manchin lately, have been pretty stubborn about details of this plan. There are progressives like Bernie Sanders who are unhappy, particularly about a tax break that was included for property tax deductions from income taxes. A cap was raised that would really benefit wealthier people. It was done mostly for high-wage areas, New York, New Jersey, California. A lot of people object to that. That was one of the reasons why they didn't get all the Democrats in the House to vote for today. One representative didn't on that particular issue, but that's how they got some of the other moderates to come along from these high wealth states. These are things that are going to have to get sorted out. There are things, as Gloria mentioned, paid family and medical leave that Manchin has raised questions about. He doesn't want to add costs to Medicare. So it's going to be a really challenging month. And they have to do this in such a way that it comes back to the House in a way that it can pass the House. So, you know, I think the president should celebrate tonight and then roll up his sleeves tomorrow, because the hill just gets steeper from here.
Yeah, he's going to celebrate his birthday tomorrow. He turns, as we said, 79 years old tomorrow.
I think he should invite Joe Manchin to his birthday party, don't you?
Yeah, that would be nice. All right, Gloria and David. Thank you guys very, very much. Coming up, we're going to have more reaction on the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict today after his acquittal in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Plus, another high-profile trial we're following right now, this one in Georgia, where 3 men are charged with killing Ahmaud Arbery. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.
You get more with AARP.
Lending a hand is as simple as that.
Due to high vehicle demand locally and nationwide.
This is the new Walker interview yesterday in today's Post. It says this, quote, "Every minute mattered. You have to understand. These are my friends here," Walker said, referring to his close relationship with former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund, who was forced to resign following the attack, and other law enforcement officials. I'm still, and I read yesterday's story, went back and read it again when I saw the update today. I'm still lost on why there's a fight over 25 minutes and no one feels as sensitive about the 3-hour gap.
I can't answer the second one. The first one, you know, you listen to Walker and say, he's like, first of all, if you're in a command structure, the notion that you would have to be told twice.
Right.
Like, I can see why he's pushing back on that. If he's maintaining that he didn't get the 4:30 call, half an hour, and he said every minute matters. And it's true.
Right.
At 4:30, there was still brutal fighting going on Capitol Hill. I mean, like, again, I was up there. Some of those body cam images that we've gotten were in that 4 o'clock hour. And so to say every minute mattered and I didn't ignore a call at 4:30, I understand why the guy's standing up for himself. I get that. The second question, though, goes to the public policy question, which is this question of why we raised it yesterday and we'll raise it again. You know, the 2 o'clock hour, if you were up there, felt like 2 days. I mean, the stuff you were seeing and the degree of peril and jeopardy that was clearly present on the ground, you know, felt like a long time. And the notion that the 2 o'clock hour passed and the 3 o'clock hour passed, and people, as I mentioned yesterday, Congress people were hearing stories that the administration was stopping the military from being deployed, the National Guard from being deployed. Yesterday, Dan Goldman raised, and we didn't get into it, the Larry Hogan thing, which is also true. Right. The governor of Maryland was on the circus, and he said he was sitting there all through that period, waiting to have the Maryland National Guard called in, wondering why they weren't getting called, talking on the phone with congressional leaders in the bunker, and they were saying, you got to send your National Guard. He's saying, I can't do that until it's ordered. Larry Hogan was in the same position for 2 hours. I think that why people aren't more defensive about that, why that's not the central question, I don't understand it. To me, it's the central question, because I get why Walker's wrapped up in that half hour. But the larger question is 2 hours, where even if you buy Matt Miller makes the point, there was definitely sensitivity about that we've heard reporting on, which was we don't want to militarize this in advance of any attack. We thought maybe attack is coming, maybe there's going to be a riot, but we don't want to militarize it and maybe escalate it. But once the Capitol has been breached,
once Pence, I mean, here's the other thing that happened, and I don't remember what time I went on the air. I think it was around 2 o'clock. Before I got on the air, the pipe bombs had been found.
Yes, indeed.
So there were already bomb scares at the DNC and RNC, I believe.
Yes. Before the Capitol was breached, there were the bomb scares have been reported. And like I think in the 1 o'clock hour, and maybe even earlier than that, the first bomb scares were not that long after noon. I think. I'm not certain about that, but again, once the Capitol's breached at 1:50, you would think the Capitol's been breached. Mike Pence is in jeopardy. The leadership's all in jeopardy. Everyone's in jeopardy. Why is that not the moment when you immediately pull the red cord, the ripcord, or break glass, or whatever the right metaphor is here, and be like, every National Guard who's within 100 miles should be on their way to the Capitol at that point?
You know, Matt Miller, I worry that we're Millerizing the 1-6 committee, and I'd love your thoughts on that. But all these conversations, all these gaps in our understanding, all these gaps in accountability, all these sort of missing pieces of the puzzle, an IG report here, another congressional committee investigation here, call for the full accounting that the 1-6 Select Committee wants to do. Where do you sort of stand in terms of your optimism and confidence that they'll fill in gaps like this one?
I think they'll get there. Look, we often have this question, or people that haven't worked in government have this question about government. Is it more Veep or House of Cards? Meaning, when government makes mistakes,
I can answer that. Way more Veep.
Yeah, way more Veep. But are they sins of incompetence or are they sins of venality? And the truth is, on January 6th, you had both. You had mistakes of incompetence, of bureaucratic fumbling in the lead up to January 6th. I mentioned earlier the FBI failed to properly disseminate intelligence from one of its field offices. You had mistakes by the Capitol Police not properly preparing and staffing and arming policemen on the front lines. And then you had the mistakes of the Pentagon not deploying the Guard quickly enough. You, on top of that, had the sins of venality with the president, the leader of the executive branch, organizing this rally and sending his little army off to the Hill to break into the Capitol and try to overturn the election. And ultimately, we have to address both. And I think the January 6th committee is doing it. There are 2 other committees who have already done a report on some of these, let's call them the Veep mistakes from January 6th and made recommendations. I think the January 6th committee will look at it too, because ultimately, we can fix those mistakes of incompetence. The FBI can do better. We can come up with better problems. And
we didn't have the money to.
Helping your neighbors is as simple as that.
Not let this wonderful movie metaphor end here. It is the combination of the two, right? I mean, it's the smash up of, maybe even some of Manchurian and Veep. I mean, it is Donald Trump harnessing with his, what Liz Cheney has described as his intention to have violence carried out against the seat of democracy, coupled with what you're describing, which is sort of run-of-the-mill incompetence.
Craftsmanship.
It was already zoned for mobile home.
2 weeks only, we're celebrating Black Friday and Cyber Monday.
Words in Orlando.
Oof.
Wow.
All backed by our lifetime.
Adverse events, side effects that you get from the 3rd shot in their trials was actually less so than as compared to the 2nd shot. That comes up as a question a lot. How am I going to feel after the 3rd shot? They say as a general rule, you'd have fewer symptoms than after your 2nd shot.
Yeah.
Everyone.
In our audience right now.
100 hand signs, get it done.
Did you know that unvaccinated individuals are 30 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID than those who are vaccinated?
So if you haven't gotten your vaccination yet, now is the time. The COVID-19 vaccine is safe, effective, and plentiful.
Don't wait until you or someone you love is gravely ill. Get your shot today. Learn more at siouxfalls.org/vaccine.
One of our biggest sales of the year, the Thanks.
In the late 80s for an aneurysm, and then he's had this fracture of his foot. What we know is now there's a pretty detailed report, 6-page report that came from his doctors talking about what the president had done today, examining his cardiac rhythm, and they say that his atrial fibrillation is stable. They did a full exam of his lungs as well. They did a colonoscopy, which we knew about, Wolf. That was something that required sedation. That is when transfer of power occurred. But we also know at the time that he had that done, he also had a upper endoscopy as well. So looking for evidence of reflux, something that has been bothering the president, and they did find some evidence of reflux. They also looked in his sinuses as well to see if there was some explanation for what people may have heard more recently with the president. Lots of throat clearing when he's giving his speeches. And what the doctors seem to have indicated in this report as I'm reading it is that this is probably due to some reflux that he's having. They also have noticed, and you may have noticed it as well, Wolf, his gait, his walking, they said, has changed a little bit, a little less fluid, as they described it, a little bit more stiff, and they wanted to find out what was sort of causing that. And what they're saying here, it seems to be a combination of this foot fracture that he had, but also some evidence of what's called spinal stenosis, some arthritis in his lower back. So these are two new things that sort of came about that they were investigating as part of the president's physical today. But again, the big procedure, the colonoscopy, the endoscopy, looking for the reflux, and then also looking at his sinuses. So his heart, these other issues that we've known about appeared stable as they've outlined. His cholesterol is still good, actually very low on the current medication. So overall, they say they started the letter by saying he remains fit for duty.
Yeah, I was impressed. He got a colonoscopy, an endoscopy to check for reflux that's up higher. He was sedated for at least an hour, maybe even longer. Yet when he got to the White House, for the pardon of the turkeys, he looked fine. He sounded fine. You know, I've had those procedures, and I sort of wanted to rest a little bit afterwards. I know you have as well, right, Sanjay?
Yeah, you know, I mean, not oversharing, but I actually had a colonoscopy yesterday, Wolf, so I you know, very recent experience. And you're right, I mean, the nice thing about some of these medications is that they are very quick on and quick off, as they are described. They work very quickly to put someone to sleep, and then they come off very quickly as well. So you often do feel a little groggy for a little bit afterwards, Wolf, and you know, he turns 79 tomorrow, so maybe even more so for him. But I agree with you. He looked pretty good when he got back to the White House.
I was very impressed. All right, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, thank you very much. You feel okay after your colonoscopy, I assume, right?
Yeah, I feel fine, thanks.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Wolf.
Thank you. Just ahead, we're getting more reaction to the not guilty verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. We got more reaction coming up.
50s in western South Dakota. As you're seeing, though, on First Alert Live Doppler radar, a lot of cloud cover over the area, which is going to persist through tonight. That'll actually keep our overnight lows a little warmer. Most of us only falling into those lower to mid 30s. Temperatures right now well above that.
It's like, I don't really know what to do with this.
To address gun violence and other violent crimes, and to combat hate and domestic extremism, and to enhance the response to people in crisis. You know, in addition, this announcement, along with the historic funding of the American Rescue Plan, means communities have the resources now available for the community violence intervention more than they've ever had before. We're talking about programs like Violence Interrupters, who work as a complement to police in identifying those most likely to be involved in gun violence, stopping it from happening to begin, and put those at risk, who put those people at risk, and put them on a better road to life. So we get them and divert them before they get into the bad stream to begin with. And I want to thank the folks in front of me for doing that. And I want to thank the attorney.
Basically tell ZipRecruiter.
Advisor to President Obama and an MSNBC contributor. And Kavitha Davidson is here, sports and culture writer for the website The Athletic. Kavitha, I start with you. Tell us about what was happening before and whether we know if she reached out to anyone or had any concerns that this might happen.
Yeah, so we don't know very much about that, unfortunately. Her post was taken down by censors on Chinese social media website Weibo about 30 minutes after she posted it, and that was on November 2nd, and nobody has really heard from her since. So this is definitely a very scary situation, and frankly, American and international media took a few days to really catch on to this story, and I'm very glad that we're talking about it now.
What can the IOC do? I mean, other than sort of raising awareness, can they demand to see her, or what? I mean, how powerful is sort of tennis in China? How big of a deal are their sports stars?
Well, China has been using sports, much like Russia has for years, as a marker of where it sees itself in the global community and its global ambitions. And I think most Americans, when they think of that, think about basketball, but tennis is also a huge part of that. For the last 5 to 10 years, China has been bidding on futures tournaments and juniors tournaments, and just signed a couple of years ago a 10-year deal for the WTA finals to be held in Shenzhen. So tennis is a huge deal. The WTA coming out and calling for transparency and for assurances of her safety is a big deal. But the IOC also does have a lot of power here. You know, as you mentioned, the Olympics are going to be held in Beijing just in February, and the IOC likes to tout itself as a marker of democracy and women's equality. And you know, back in 2012, when Saudi Arabia finally sent a woman, the IOC took some credit for that and credit for really furthering the cause of women. Well, their silence in this case has been absolutely deafening, and they've used the words quiet diplomacy, and I don't quite know what that means when we haven't heard from this woman in almost 3 weeks.
I mean, quiet diplomacy, Ben Rose, is what we use when someone has been sort of lost in North Korea. What does this say about the state of U.S.-Chinese relations?
Well, it says a lot about China, first of all, that what you had is this woman knew the risk she was taking. She said in her post that she might be courting self-destruction. And minutes after that post goes up, it's taken down. And her disappearance is not the only one that's taken place in China recently. We've had very prominent business people, Jack Ma, the most famous Chinese entrepreneur, disappear for a long stretch of time, and with similarly vague statements put out. What's different here, Nicole, is the courage of the WTA, and obviously the courage of this athlete, and her fellow players on the tour. You had Serena Williams speaking out, you had Naomi Osaka speaking out, you had the tour speaking out. That is showing more courage from the Women's Tennis Association and its players than 99% of corporate America has in standing up to Chinese repression. I think that's why this is such a seismic moment in geopolitical issues and in sports issues coming together, because you have a group of people not bowing to the fear that China can leverage its economic clout to tell them what to do and to silence this woman.
Ben, one more question for you. What can a White House do? You've advised a president. I mean, what does sort of American leadership, if it's even a possibility, look like?
I think you can speak about this. You can give voice to this. The Chinese government does not want attention on this woman and her allegations, and so you can provide that attention. They are trying to sweep something under the rug in front of the entire world, and you have the biggest megaphone in the world in the White House to speak out against it. And to speak out, the IOC is, look, supposed to be responsible for the safety of athletes. How can they guarantee the safety of athletes at the Winter Olympics if athletes are disappeared like this inside of China? So I think you want to bring as much attention to this issue as possible.
It's an unbelievable story, John Hellman.
It's an absolutely unbelievable story, although unfortunately, if you look at the record of Chinese human rights abuses, it's not unbelievable at all. It just happens that this woman, as Ben said, it's at this level of prominence. The Chinese abuse human rights of thousands, more than thousands.
11 weeks out from the opening ceremony.
All the time. And I guess the question that I actually, am curious about is whether, we had Joe Biden, the administration is now thinking about a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics. Does this become a trigger point for that? Is that a useful tool? There's a lot of debate about whether there are Republicans who are calling for total boycott, economic sanctions around the games. Others who say, we want to make sure the athletes can still compete. There's a kind of a big debate happening around this. And against the backdrop of pervasive human rights abuses, does a high-profile case like this, we don't know fully what's happened, but obviously it smells very, very bad. Does this kind of amplify that and turn this into a much bigger potential international question in terms of diplomacy and the Olympics?
We're going to keep our eyes on this story with your help. We'll continue to cover it. Ben Rose, Kavitha Davidson, thank you so much for joining our coverage. John sticks around. When we come back, more from our interview with Huma Abedin and the moment her then-husband, Anthony Weiner, finally revealed the truth about the text messages he was sending to other women to her.
But it's only human to know how far.
Program processes claims more quickly and speeds up payments, makes clear the public safety officers who are acting in an emergency situation, no matter the jurisdiction, are covered, and broadly defines what it means to be permanently disabled. Before this law, first responders permanently disabled in the line of duty were only eligible for benefits programs if they could never again perform any of the compensated work that they performed. Now, what you guys and women have changed is that you allowed the disabled first responders who can't do the work they have been trained for, but still can perform tasks and take on work that's therapeutic for them, to do these jobs without losing the benefits, at the same time getting both the pay and the benefit if it's in a different area. There's a line inscribed in the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial that you've all seen many, many times. In valor, there is hope. In valor, there is hope. Well, as one of the leaders of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Foundation pointed out, this bill restores their sense of valor. And with that comes a lot of hope. The third and final bill I'll sign is named Jaime Zappa and Victor, Avrila. I didn't want to mispronounce it. I hope I pronounced it correctly because it's important. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents who were ambushed by a drug cartel hitman in Mexico in 2011. The assailants tried to pull Agent Zappa from the driver's seat of the vehicle and shooting him 6 times. And Agent Avrila, despite having been shot, was able to push Zappa's leg down on the accelerator and escape the attack. Unfortunately, Agent Zappa later died of his wounds. That tragedy was compounded by another tragedy, a miscarriage of justice. The murder convictions against the 2 killers responsible for the murder were overturned on appeal. It was overturned because the law didn't make clear that the Department of Justice can prosecute anyone who kills or attempts to kill a federal law enforcement officer outside the United States. Thankfully, the murderers remain in prison, being convicted of other incidents stemming from that same incident. But this bill is going to protect agents serving abroad and send a message to drug cartels, terrorists, and criminals wherever they operate, that if you attack our agents, you will not escape our justice. I want to thank Senator Coons and Senator Cornyn for that legislation, Representative Henry Kawar, and Michael McCall, Steve Shabbat, and other leaders for their leadership on this bill. In just a minute, I'll sign these bills, and they're good and important bipartisan bills. But I want to thank the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Fraternal Order of Police, and the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Officers and other law enforcement organizations that have been constructive players in negotiating over meaningful police reform. So I'm asking bipartisan leaders here today to come together with them, as you've done before, to finally pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But that's next. And now I want to sign each of these bills. God bless you all, and may God protect all our law enforcement officers and first responders throughout the nation. Thank you. I'm going to sign these bills. By the way, there's a tradition, when you sign the bill, you give the signing pen to the authors of the bill. But I don't have that many pens with me. So I'm going to make sure everyone will get a pen. Everyone will get a pen. I'm not trying to hoard the pens, guys. Okay. Hi. What's your name? Nice to meet you. How old are you? 7 years old.
You are. Great. First grade. Oh, that's great, man. Thank you for being here. You okay? Maybe after this I can show you a room. What? You see it? Okay. Here we go. All right. Okay. And then, well, I'm not going to do that. We got the same group up here? Yeah. We can take that way.
Hi. Thank you for doing my bill. I never got to do my bill. You did such a good job. You did such a good job. Hey there. How are you? How are you doing? I'm good. Oh, no, you're fine.
What's that guy behind you?
He's there. God bless you.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, now I'm going to sign the third bill. Okay.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Thanks for your work.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats while the president departs. Thank you.
I meet with all the leaders. So thank you all so very, very much. Thank you. I hope you guys can stick a minute for this to say hello. Thanks.
I know you'll be okay. You'll be okay.
115 miles per hour when he crashed and was under the influence of alcohol and drugs. A woman charged in the death of her 2-year-old child in Hamlin County will not go on trial. Josephine Raimundo entering a plea agreement last week. She was facing charges of first and second degree manslaughter. Those charges are in connection to a child who was found unresponsive in June of 2020. The child was pronounced dead after being taken to the hospital. As part of the plea deal, Raimundo will plead guilty to child abuse. Prison time will be capped at 5 years, sentencing scheduled for December 9th. Governor Noem's current chief of staff, Aaron Scheibe, will be departing from his current position after taking it a few months ago. The governor's office says Scheibe will stay on with the office as a legislative consultant, specifically helping shepherd American Rescue Plan funding through the state legislature. Meantime, Mark Miller, who has acted as general counsel for the governor's office for over a year, will serve as interim chief of staff. The FDA says all fully vaccinated adults in the U.S. can now get a COVID-19 booster. Previously, only those who were 65 years or older and adults who were at high risk of getting the disease were eligible. The FDA decided to expand the emergency use authorization after a phase 3 trial showed boosters are safe and have an efficacy of 95% against symptomatic COVID-19. Students and staff at Ben Rifle Middle School getting together today for a Thanksgiving dinner helped put on by some of those students. The students are a part of RISE, a special education program at the school. The students make the meal in groups and help serve it to their peers, the teachers, as well as any community leaders invited to attend. RISE team leader Desiree Berghoff says that she wants it to be something that the students remember for a long time.
It's their first time too, but they're so excited, which is so fun. And my staff is so excited, even my aides and stuff who have never done it before. And it's just the building up to it and all the things we've been working on. It's just been really exciting.
She says that she hopes the Thanksgiving dinner will be an annual tradition at Ben Rifle Middle School for years to come. The Washington Pavilion inviting the Sioux Falls community to come out for its annual Christmas tree lighting next week. The 45-foot decorated tree will be located just outside of the pavilion on the corner of 11th Street and Main Avenue. Sioux Falls Mayor Paul Tenhaken expected to speak, and there will be a special tribute to the education community for their dedication during the pandemic. The tree lighting beginning at 7 p.m. next Friday. Nice to see the Christmas spirit already getting around here. We still have to, do Thanksgiving, obviously.
Yeah, and during this next newscast on KSFY and back here at 5:30 on KDLT, we'll see meteorologist Austin Haskins at Falls Park, and that's going to be a lot of fun tonight, too.
Get to see those lights light up fine as well, too, which will be nice.
Yeah, he kind of gave a preview earlier on in this newscast, but obviously the sun was still up. And as we head into tonight...
A plan that gives you the chance to grow your savings.
All now. It's free.
Call 1-800-711-5700. That's...
Ozempic isn't for people with type 1 diabetes.
Make sure that we get our money's worth on all that. So thanks, everybody. God bless you guys, and we appreciate it.
Federal health officials testified on global distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, the 2022 COVID-19 forecast, and other treatments for the virus. You can watch this House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing tonight at 8 Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or watch full.
So the business meeting is to vote on 2 nominations that were on the agenda of our November business meeting.
Tonight, 11 o'clock, great show. We're going to be talking about Rittenhouse. A lot of stuff, actually. We got Kat, you got Rob Smith, you got Greg Ellis, Elizabeth McDonald. All lots of fun. And now it's time for, 3 things.
3 things.
Greg's Giant Cat News.
All right. As the United States, I pardon you. I pardon you this Thanksgiving. Go ahead, say something. There you go. Thanks for the pardon. But I also have to pardon Jelly, too. Jelly, you don't have to get up.
It's President Biden's first pardon, fresh off his big legislative win this morning. The president handled another serious matter in the Rose Garden. He pardoned a turkey named Peanut Butter. Now this year's official Thanksgiving turkey. Biden also spared the other turkey, Jelly, who benefited from a little luck and tradition. Quick break for us. We will be right back.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, a fierce champion of virility, and one of my favorites.
Governor.
And Stephen Miller, who embodies the only qualities anybody could ask for: confidence, courage in the face of evil, brawn. And Stephen will be on Water's World tomorrow night with Chris Christie, Ben Shapiro, and Dana Lash. So check out that show at 8. And then primetime tonight at 7, we have Steve Scalise who actually took a bullet from a radical left-winger, and Victor Davis Hanson, Tommy Lahren, Laura Logan, and Raymond Arroyo, also one of my favorite men, Raymond Arroyo. Emily.
Thanks.
You're not Emily.
Not anymore. All right, guys, the Duffys are out with a new book called All American Christmas, and it highlights the stories.
From our famous hand-cut meat to fresh fruits.
It's here. Our hearty and home-style menu is back, starting at just $8.99. Enjoy our classic pot roast dinner.
So what's been the reaction that you're seeing?
It's very calm tonight. Throughout this trial, though, every single day, there have been protesters who would come to the steps, right on the steps of the court, right up to the doors of the court. Every day you would see that. About 24 people at max. Some of them were there to decry what they believed Kyle Rittenhouse did. Some of them were there to support Kyle Rittenhouse. There was every day the uncle of Jacob Blake who was here, and people say, well, why was he there? Well, because the protests were in Jacob Blake's name, and when some of those protests turned to riots, he was there to talk about and to remember the 2 people killed and the person who was injured, who were there out, some of them protesting in the name of Jacob Blake. And so you saw this every single day. It never got violent. There were a couple of small incidents that police were right on and took care of right away, the sheriff's department. And there were folks who were out here, 2 or 3 of them, who came out armed, one of them with an AR-15 style rifle. He was told to put that away, but it has been calm. This whole trial, there has been noise, but there has been the First Amendment right of those people to protest. Nothing beyond that has happened. Wolf?
You know, Jeffrey Rittenhouse was very emotional today hearing the not guilty verdicts. He broke down, started to cry. But a lot of us remember he also broke down while he was testifying on the stand. Did that resonate, do you believe, with the jury that a 17-year-old at the time, now 18-year-old, was actually crying?
In a criminal case, whenever the defendant takes the stand, and it usually doesn't happen, most defendants don't take the stand, it becomes by far the most important evidence in the case. And I think it was clear then, and it's clear now, that Rittenhouse was an effective witness. I don't know about the crying being so significant, but the fact that he could describe the threat he felt from each of the 3 people he shot was very important, I think, for the jury. And the prosecutors, in cross-examining him, didn't have the kind of material that they needed, false statements, other bad acts, a criminal record. They didn't have that cross-examination material, and the jury obviously embraced Rittenhouse's story.
Or the phone. And I remember listening to it off to my left, and when he started talking about how Rittenhouse was advanced upon and how somebody lunged for his weapon, I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, this is a state witness, and if that is your best witness, your second witness out of the box, and they're coming in giving a defense presentation, I literally said to people I was watching the trial with, I said, if this is their best case, their case is over, because unfortunately the state carries such a high burden in, as Trent said, a very complicated manner of viewing. You know, we as lawyers look at this case and go, well, okay, we know what self-defense is because we've studied it. We know what beyond a reasonable doubt is. But normal jurors look at these cases and they're confused from day one. So when the state has an inconsistent presentation, they get lost.
Well, and there was also, you know, Gage Grosskreutz. That testimony was key as well. Listen, criminal defense attorney Mark O'Mara and attorney Trent Copeland, again, it's great to have both of you to lead us off tonight. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Great to be here.
We have continuing coverage of the Rittenhouse verdict right here on News Nation. How big of a role did the video play in this case and others like it? From George Floyd to Ahmaud Arbery, video has changed everything. I'll speak with a former police officer next about how policing has changed with body cams. And a journalist recounts that fateful night in Kenosha. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media at The Donlin Report on Twitter. Back after this.
A $300 bonus is being offered to all city employees who show proof of vaccination by Christmas. Fox 32 in Chicago, where an investigation at Marine Leadership Academy uncovers inappropriate relationships between staff and students. They're said to be substantiated findings against 12 employees and 1 volunteer. 10 of the individuals have been terminated or are in the process of being dismissed. And this is a live look at San Diego from KSWB. One of the big stories there tonight, just north in Los Angeles, a deaf high school varsity football team is within reach of a division championship after an undefeated season. Players and coaches at the California School for the Deaf Riverside use sign language to communicate on the field. With a win tonight, the group would play in the championship for the first time in the school's 68-year history. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Reports. We'll be right back.
Everybody's sense of safety and protection in the streets, even when white folks are the folks carrying the gun and they are under no threat at all. As Kyle Rittenhouse admitted himself, he was not threatened. He didn't think there was a threat. He came there to intimidate, and he was allowed to do so. And let me say this last thing, Ari. And then all of us are treated to his sense of relief as the verdict is being read. And the rest of us get no relief, right? The rest of us tonight, our souls feel heavy. We're on, heightened alert about our own protection and safety. But the law says that white relief is the thing that we should take away from this. So he gets to go home and sleep in his bed tonight. And the rest of us get to think about whether it's safe for us to go out and exercise our right to peacefully protest.
And the 2 people who lost their lives do not get to go rest.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Cunningham. Go ahead.
I mean, I just think that what Dr. Cooper is saying is so critically important because all of us are being subjugated to the defense of white supremacy and Kyle Rittenhouse's feelings. We've talked about his tears ad nauseum. We will talk about the tears that he displayed today even more. Why? Because this country is much more concerned with the feelings of a white man who went out with an AR-15 than they are the rest of us who were meant to be intimidated not only by that direct action, but by the people who continuously defend him, who fund him, and apparently Matt Gaetz, who may even want to hire him. So I think that the point that Dr. Cooper is making cannot be understated. And I will say, frankly, that I'm deeply disappointed in the commentary of the president today. For him to stand up in this moment, fail to read the room, and then say that the jury system works. My question is, Mr. President, for whom? There are mountains upon mountains of research that have shown us just how disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are convicted in these courtrooms. How much more we are sent to death row. Hello, Julius Jones. How much more we are convicted of the same crime when white people are able to walk free. So this desire to prove American exceptionalism when the evidence is to the contrary is staring us right in the face. It is going to be the literal and moral death of us. It is going to also be a great challenge to the Democratic Party, because I will tell you what my text messages look like today. For all of those friends who had to be convinced to vote because they didn't necessarily believe in this system, and I understand why, they're saying, why did I show up? Why should I do this again? This desire to appease white parts of the population that haven't voted for the Democratic Party for decades at the expense of supporting and speaking to the pain of the Black folks who put you in office, it's frankly insulting and is going to do serious damage to the Democratic Party's political desires. And I don't mean to get political, but I do think that it's important that we recognize that the leader of that party said something today that was deeply insulting and added insult to the injury that Dr. Cooper so clearly spoke to.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your points. And for viewers, I always underscore context. Ms. Cunningham is speaking as someone who's also worked on the inside because you worked in the Obama-Biden administration, but you're criticizing President Biden, substantively, based on the values that you have and what he said. I'm going to just read off two things in the context. I mentioned the families, and the Professor Cooper talked about the history there from, Goldman being killed in the Freedom Summer, along with black and white activists, and this pattern here. And the Huber family reacting today, saying, quote, and we can put this up, "We're heartbroken and angry that Rittenhouse was acquitted in the criminal trial for the murder of our son, Anthony Huber. There was no justice today for Anthony or for Mr. Rittenhouse's other victims, Joseph Rosenbaum and Gage Grosskreutz." And you see the face there of a young man who was exercising constitutional rights, as mentioned, who was showing up at a BLM rally. That's what he was doing. With regard to Biden, so folks know, he said, quote, "I stand by what the jury's concluded. The jury system works. We have to abide by it," while saying many are angry, and he is among them. This is an important conversation. We have two guests here that we've had on before. I appreciated you leading off our coverage tonight, Brittany in this case. Thanks to both of you.
I'm sorry.
Appreciate it. There's a lot of other developing news. We're finishing our first break of the hour, but Steve Bannon back in trouble, losing to the judge, awaiting potentially a jail sentence if he loses this case. We have an update with a special guest. Meanwhile, Speaker Pelosi touting a big win that has people calling her the GOAT. Stay with us.
The road home for the holidays. We're the ultimate driving machine.
They want to know they can count on me.
Today's verdict sends the unacceptable message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, and then use the danger they have created to justify shooting people in the street. Do you agree? Does this embolden, do you believe, others to follow Rittenhouse's example?
Yes, I think this is a very, very dangerous precedent that has been set. I mean, as an attorney in the state of Wisconsin, along with Georgia and Texas, I believe that, it's important that we have clear standards and be able to hold individuals accountable for engaging in provoking situations. I think that you don't see the same thing occur when it's African Americans. I mean, hey, I hate to make this about race, but it is about race. When is the last time that we've seen an African American in a highly publicized case, not charged when having that you used deadly force? That just doesn't happen. So again, I mean, this is a dangerous precedent when one can come from another state, engage in activities that don't affect him at all, or he wasn't asked or required to be there, and he ends up shooting and killing two individuals and shooting a third and injuring them. This is a complete dangerous precedent, and I think we definitely have a lot of work to do to change it.
The Ivory Lamar, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Will.
Thank you. Coming up, a critical win for President Biden's domestic agenda after the House of Representatives passes his landmark spending bill. Stay with us. You're in the Situation Room.
Should get ready for another cool down. That's exactly what we get as we head through the weekend. The first of two cold fronts will push through the area on Saturday, and while that brings a few showers our way, it doesn't bring in the chillier air mass. Yet, a secondary cold front that passes by Sunday is what opens the door for another cool down. A ridge of high pressure then comes along by Tuesday, sending temperatures back up into the 40s, 50s, and even the low 60s, before being replaced by another upper level trough and temperatures in the 30s by Thanksgiving. Beyond the extended outlook, we'll try to keep near to above average temperatures in place as we head toward the start of December. Keep in mind, however, that average by the beginning of September is in the upper 30s. For KELO weather, I'm meteorologist Adam Rudd.
We have had clouds spread from west east across the KELO region during the afternoon hours, erasing what had been some morning sun. And we're going to keep the clouds tonight and tomorrow for the most part as well. This is the way it looks up in northeastern South Dakota in Watertown. 34 degrees south breeze at 6. This is the way it looked this afternoon in Sioux Falls out at Falls Park. The clouds coming on in, and as the sun goes down, they click the switch. And that's what it looks like now at Falls Park in Sioux Falls. 44 degrees south wind at 10 miles an hour. It's nice to see the Christmas lights, but I had to show you this sunset one more time. time. How does that look in downtown Sioux Falls? I wish I could paint something like that. Highs during the day today, we're in the 50s in the west, the 40s here in the eastern part of KELOland. The clouds, though, that was the story as they moved west to east through the KELOland region during the afternoon hours today. For tonight, we'll keep the clouds, and that'll hold the temperatures up. Our lows will be in the upper 20s to around 30 degrees with just a 5 to 10 mile-an-hour wind. And we'll have like no winds again tomorrow here in eastern KELOland. Just a very gentle north breeze. We will have a lot of clouds, and tomorrow those clouds might have just enough moisture to produce a little bit of rainfall. We're calling them sprinkles because the forecast models have been saying a few hundredths of an inch tops. And in the case of Rapid City, there could be a few flakes of snow mixed in with those sprinkles. Then on Sunday, the clouds clear out of here with a front coming through. So it'll be mostly sunny, but it is going to be windy, and it's going to start to cool down. Sioux Falls, 40, Aberdeen, 36, 38 in Pierre, and 42 degrees in Rapid City. All right. It's Thanksgiving week. Here's the way it's looking. Our warmest day, as we've been saying, looks like Tuesday at 49. Coolest day just might be Thanksgiving Day itself. I put a chance of flurries in there, moisture-starved stuff possible, but only 34 for high on Thursday. It is going to be a cool day. In the Aberdeen area, the coolest day, well, the warmest day looks like Tuesday of next week. The coolest day looks like Thursday, Thanksgiving. A few flurries is all we are expecting, and 32 for a high. For the Pierre area, the warmest day next week, Tuesday at 56, cooling back down by Thursday, Thanksgiving. Flurries and 37 degrees. And in Rapid City, the warmest day looks like Tuesday at 60. Then we cool back down. Only 40 for high on Thanksgiving Day. Good day to sit inside and watch football.
Your vehicle may never be worth more than...
They volunteer, they coach, they lead. To us, they're our greatest assets. Go with community. Go with the people you can trust. Go.
1-800-479-5900 now.
Your kind minority can talk on the floor, not a full filibuster, but they can run out, time. Kevin McCarthy tried to basically go as long as he could, breaking a kind of a record with 8 hours that delayed what was inevitable.
Just a few weeks ago, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger said, "Nobody elected Joe Biden to be FDR."
That's just a little bit of the back and forth. So what happens now? And if you feel like deja vu, well, that's partly true and partly not. The deja vu may be, gosh, a lot of times we hear about spending in the House and then the Senate, but then the House again and then the Senate. The part that is new and not deja vu is a lot of that was about whether there would be two bills at once or the infrastructure bill, which ultimately passed. What's new now is this is the social safety net bill at a compromise number that Biden wants that will really go to the Senate. So if the Democrats can hold together there, it would be the second big win here at the end of the year for the Biden agenda. What happens next? The man who used to run the party himself, Howard Dean, is here when we're back in just 60 seconds.
Trilogy for COPD. Quick thinking cops put on a pizza delivery.
Inside the courthouse now, hardly anyone is here now. But really haven't seen any major clashes between groups who are out here. A few shouting matches, a sign ripped down, but zero violence and hardly any interactions involving police. But this town, knowing what has happened previously, is sort of bracing for what could happen as we get later into the evening. We talked to some folks who've come out here for different reasons. Here's what they sort of predict could happen tonight.
If there's going to be rioting, it's going to be like tonight when it's dark, because usually it starts when it's dark. But I feel like the tensions are rising, but at the same time, there might not be rioting this time. I don't know.
There's no need for the National Guard. There's not going to be any violence. You might have some bickering back and forth, but that's going to be the extent of it.
Now, one thing that could be a major factor on whether or not things get out of control is the weather. It's going to be in the mid-30s tonight, so that could be keeping people people from coming to Kenosha and doing whatever they planned on doing. There's also National Guards on standby. There's a lot of police officers out here, but at this point, Janet, it is just too early to tell.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much for keeping track on it. We'll check back with you. Let's continue our discussion of the Rittenhouse trial and verdict. Joining us now, Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, and Emily Campagno, co-host of Outnumbered, right here on Fox. Great to see both of you. Howie, I'll start with you. Our buddy Joe Concha tweets this. He says, the Kyle Rittenhouse lawsuits against some media outlets and figures will make the Nicholas Sandmann lawsuits look like pennies on the dollar. Think that's a fair assessment?
Well, that's assuming he wants to be involved in more litigation as opposed to getting his life back. Look, this was a monumental case of media malpractice. For months now, much of the media have smeared and vilified Kyle Rittenhouse as a white supremacist, as a racist vigilante, as an out-and-out murderer. But at the trial by jury, as opposed to the trial by media, obviously the testimony about self-defense was strong enough to produce an acquittal. But even now, after the verdict, I'm seeing some pundits on the left who are calling the verdict outrageous, who are saying they're blaming the judge, they're blaming the prosecutors, they're blaming racism, because in the end, the facts didn't fit their narrative.
And that's where we're left tonight. So, Emily, interesting that Jorge Ventura, he is one of the guys who was out there on the night this thing happened, and he was for many nights there in Kenosha. And he tweets this. He says, the Rittenhouse trial is a great example how important it is to have journalists front lines. The corporate press attempted to control the narrative, but the video evidence was too much to overcome. And Emily, you know, we had it from numerous different angles, from numerous different sources. How much do you think that impacted what ultimately happened in this trial?
In terms of the video evidence, a great deal. And, you know, taking it back to the X's and O's of what was being charged, 4 counts of the 5 had the self-defense privilege available. And on those 4, the defense indeed met its burden of proving to the jury that Kyle Rittenhouse at the time had a reasonable fear of imminent bodily harm or death, and that he used reasonable force in response to it. And then that 5th and final count that didn't have the self-defense privilege, well, the prosecution there failed to meet their burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Kyle Rittenhouse had engaged in reckless endangerment by brandishing that weapon and shooting it with a bystander behind. Now, in terms of the media shaping, I agree wholeheartedly.
Tonight, not guilty on all counts. The jury reaches a verdict in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse after more than 24 hours of deliberation.
Not guilty.
The emotion in the courtroom as the teenager who shot 3 people at a protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin, avoids life in prison and walks free. The reaction tonight. The breaking news, the CDC greenlights boosters for all adults, plus why it's so dangerous that pregnant women are still one of the highest groups of unvaccinated Americans. President Biden's health update. The president undergoes a physical the day before his 79th birthday, and the history made when he transferred power to Vice President Kamala Harris. Plus,
instead of getting basted, these two are getting boosted.
The turkey pardoning tradition. Wait until you hear the name of these 2 lucky birds. Thanksgiving travel trouble? The new details on that powerful storm and what it means for your holiday. A win for President Biden.
The Build Back Better bill is passed.
What's in the bill as it heads to the Senate for an uphill battle? Texas cancer cluster? Why are childhood leukemia rates in this Houston neighborhood nearly 5 times the state average? And what's being done to fix the problem? And on the road with the story of a 9-year-old who stole the show at his sister's wedding.
This is the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to begin with new reaction tonight to the verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. A jury in Wisconsin today found the 18-year-old from Illinois not guilty on all charges. Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 protesters and wounded a 3rd in August of 2020. And this trial has sparked debate across the country about gun rights and self-defense. Rittenhouse brought a semi-automatic rifle and a medical kit to the protest, saying that he wanted to protect businesses when violence erupted over the police shooting of a black man who was left paralyzed. Rittenhouse's case garnered national attention, dividing Americans over whether he was doing the right thing or acting as a reckless vigilante. CBS's Nancy Chen has covered the trial gavel to gavel and leads off our coverage from Kenosha. Good evening, Nancy.
Good evening to you, Nora. 500 National Guard troops remain on standby tonight outside the city of Kenosha. But while there have been demonstrations so far, there's been no signs of unrest.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Kyle Rittenhouse cried, collapsing onto the table after jurors found the 18-year-old not guilty on all charges.
Not guilty.
Overcome with emotion, Rittenhouse needed help getting back to his chair.
Charges against the defendant on all counts are dismissed with prejudice.
The teen was facing 5 felony counts, including first-degree intentional homicide, which carried a life sentence. Rittenhouse's attorney, Mark Richards, was asked how Rittenhouse felt leaving the courthouse a free man.
A huge sense of relief for what the jury did to him today. He wishes none of this would have ever happened.
A pivotal point in the trial was the day Rittenhouse took the stand and broke down during questioning.
Take a deep breath, Kyle. When we prepared Kyle and we worked on his testimony, there were things we couldn't talk about in my office because it got too emotional and he couldn't handle it. He's in, counseling for PTSD.
The trial garnered attention nationwide. President Biden said he understood the verdict would leave many Americans feeling angry and concerned, including himself.
Well, look, I stand by what the jury has concluded. The jury system works, and we have to abide by it.
The jury of 7 women and 5 men deliberated for about 26 hours. They believed Rittenhouse's claims that he acted in self-defense when he killed 2 men and wounded a 3rd during unrest in Kenosha last year.
I didn't do anything wrong. I defended myself.
During 8 days of testimony, prosecutors tried to portray Rittenhouse as an instigator, armed with an AR-15 style weapon who provoked the shootings.
No justice! No peace!
Outside the courthouse, friends and family members of the victims called the verdict unjust.
I am heartbroken.
Susan Hughes is the great aunt of Anthony Huber, the 2nd man killed by Rittenhouse. Do you think this was a fair verdict?
I think they tried. I like the fact that there must have been someone fighting for us, because it wouldn't have taken them that long.
As for what's next, Rittenhouse's attorney says he will likely move out of this area over safety concerns and that he wants to become a nurse. Nora?
Nancy Chen, thank you for all your coverage. And tonight, with the CDC director just signing off on boosters for all adults, Americans 18 and
opposed to this level, nearly 3 times the legal limit, and a urine sample testing positive for cocaine and marijuana. Stebbins is being held on a $50,000 bond.
For the last 5 years, victims of crimes in South Dakota have been able to keep up to date on their offenders. The SAVENT program launched in 2016 with a steady number of new registries.
But there are still many who are eligible and may not be aware of this resource available to them. Beth Warden joining us with more on the program. Good evening, Beth.
Yes, Sam. SAVENT stands for Statewide Automated Victim Information and Notification. If you are a victim of a crime, this is a free service that can help. After an offender has been taken into custody, victims can register for the SAVENT system online or by phone. Now, those victims will then be able to receive information on court dates, incarceration details, if they have a parole hearing, or if they escape. The free service has brought peace of mind to many, including Teresa Hermson, who was among the first to sign up for the free service.
When the day came that he was released, yes, my phone blew up with the SAVENT notifications, and I was fully aware of when he was walking out of there. Yes, it helped me feel more secure.
The SAVENT system isn't just for victims. Coming up, we'll let you know how you can sign up to keep your loved ones and your neighborhood safe. That's coming up at 6 over on KSFY. Sam?
Beth, thank you. Pierre has been listed among 8 cities across the nation to score a 0 on the 10th Annual Municipal Equality Index, the index evaluating cities based on the level of LGBTQ inclusion found in their local laws, policies, and services. In January, Pierre made national headlines when a group of LGBTQ advocates protested against a proposed law that would ban people from changing the sex designation on their birth certificates. A House committee later rejecting the bill in February.
A COVID-19 update in South Dakota. The Department of Health reporting more than 400 new cases and 2 more deaths today. The number of active infections continues to grow and now sits at around 6,800. Roughly 230 people are hospitalized. The CDC and FDA have...
In a typical case like this, when the defendant takes the witness stand, it all comes down to that person's credibility. But here, the jurors could evaluate for themselves what happened. They actually asked in the jury deliberation process to see those videos again. And I think that made all the difference here. Remember, they were not deciding here who do they believe more. They were deciding a very specific legal question. Do they think that the prosecutors proved beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't self-defense? And I think that those videos made a big difference.
All right, Dan Abrams and Terry Moran with us tonight. Dan, our thanks to you as well. Now to the other major headline breaking. Just a short time ago, tonight, CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky officially greenlighting booster shots now for all adults 18 and older in this country. So where to get them and how long does it take after the booster shot to get back to 95% protection?
Is stiffer and less fluid than it was a year or so ago. The team chalked that up to significant spinal arthritis and a foot fracture last year, as well as some mild dysfunction of the nerves in his feet. All told, the president spent more than 5 hours at Walter Reed Medical Center today. For 85 minutes, while he was anesthetized for his colonoscopy, Vice President Kamala Harris became the first female acting president in U.S. history. When he got back, President Biden told us he felt great, and he went on to carry out the traditional pardoning of Thanksgiving turkeys, in this case 2 turkeys named peanut butter and jelly. Bottom line here, Nora, the doctor's conclusion was that he remains a healthy, vigorous 78-year-old male who, incidentally, turns 79 tomorrow.
I'm surprised they didn't name those turkeys Pfizer and Moderna. Thanks, Nancy. All right, Saturday not only marks the president's 79th birthday, but also exactly 10 months since his inauguration. And tonight, the president and fellow Democrats are celebrating a hard-fought victory in the House for his Build Back Better plan, which he unveiled before taking office. CBS's Chris Van Cleve has an update.
The Build Back Better bill is passed.
Cheers and celebration on the House floor. After months of infighting, House Democrats advanced the president's $1.75 trillion social spending package that includes expanded Medicare, prescription drug pricing reform, universal pre-K, and hundreds of billions of dollars to fight climate change.
Are you confident that the biggest hurdles on this bill are in your rearview mirror?
Yes, this bill is monumental. It's historic, it's transformative, it's bigger than anything we've ever done. I have absolutely no doubt. The biggest hurdle was to get the bill there.
But getting there hit a last-minute snag last night, thanks to Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy setting a record for the longest floor speech in House history, a rambling 8.5-hour McCarthy marathon.
Today, I got my booster shot. More people in America thought Elvis was alive than the stimulus created a job. May I ask you a question? Did you get to take a bathroom break? And I didn't.
Only one Democrat voted against the bill, but the hard-fought legislative win now faces an uncertain fate in the Senate. Paid family leave and immigration reform are on the chopping block, and an effort to lift the cap for deducting state and local taxes could see changes too.
Are you confident that when the Senate changes this bill, it will get through the House a second time?
We have to, I'm hopeful. I wouldn't say confident. I'm hopeful because the president gave us his word that he's going to do everything he can to make sure the bill stays where it is.
Speaker Pelosi told us the president called her after the vote to offer his congratulations. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pledged to have the Senate pass the bill as quickly as possible. He is hoping to do it by the end of the year. Nora?
Chris Van Cleve, thank you. Millions of Americans are nervously watching the weather, hoping it won't make a mess of next week's Thanksgiving getaway. CBS's Lonnie Quinn joins us now with the forecast. All right.
Wolf, as he said, it is, just by saying with all due respect, it does not it does not condone anything that he said, right? It give him at least the right or the gumption to be able to say it. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's very offensive, especially when you're talking about people, and about a young man, obviously, who was killed by these 2 gentlemen. When you're talking about people who were lynched the legacy of lynching in this country and to say that it was a modern-day lynching, I think it's very offensive to everyone. Listen, I think the rhetoric, considering what's happening in this country, these two trials, one that just concluded, I think everyone needs to take the rhetoric down, especially those who are involved in the process, who are right in the middle of the process.
It comes, as you know, as that Wisconsin jury found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty at all charges after he killed 2 protesters, wounded a third. Does this verdict reinforce the feeling that there are, and I've heard this now all day, potentially 2 different justice systems here in the U.S.?
I understand, Wolf, what people say, what they mean when they say 2 different justice systems. But unfortunately, or fortunately, unfortunately, I should say, we only have one justice system. And unfortunately, that justice system is not always fair to certain people. And so I think the remedy is to fix that justice system, which is what so many people are asking for and fighting for. What happened in the courtroom, we should respect the verdict of and the conclusion that the jurors came to, and their work and their service. But as Americans, we have the right to criticize it, and we have the right to feel however we want to feel about that. And so if you don't like what happened in that courtroom or in any courtroom or what's happening in Georgia or anywhere, what you have the right to do as citizens and what you should do is fight to change that, to make the system more equitable and equal and fair for all.
You write about all this in your excellent book as well. As you know, there are some Republican politicians who are latching on to Kyle Rittenhouse, and a few, very few, but a few far-right members of Congress have said they'll offer him internships. What does it say to you that he's being held up potentially as a hero on the right?
I think that people will stoop to anything these days in order to stay in power, in order to own whatever side that they want to own. And I think the attorney, Richards, for Kyle Rittenhouse, said something that I thought that should be promoted here and that people should pay attention to. He was asked about, I think one of the questions was, what was the best thing you think you did in this case? And he said, he talked about why he took it. He took it for justice and not for a cause. However you feel about it, he wanted to represent this young man. And Mark Richards said, you know, when I took this case, I was hired by the 2 first lawyers. I'm not going to use their names. They wanted to use Kyle for a cause and something that I think was inappropriate, and I don't want to represent causes. I represent clients, and the only thing that ended up mattering to me was whether he was found not guilty or found guilty or not. And then he goes on to say, they asked him, what was the best thing you did? He said, getting rid of the first 2 lawyers. And that might sound like a smart alecky comment, but what he was saying was people have an agenda, and there are people who are using this young man, Kyle Rittenhouse, for their agenda. And I think it is reprehensible for lawmakers or anyone to be doing that. He was found not guilty. He is not guilty under the law. But I don't think that he should be a cause celeb, and I don't think that his behavior and others in that situation, I don't think it's something to celebrate when you see people running around on open streets with assault-style rifles, regardless if it's Kyle Rittenhouse or anyone. I think we should be concerned about that. And as I said in my last answer, if you don't like that, if you think that's wrong, then we should continue as citizens to fight to make it better and right.
Don, thank you very much. I know you're going to have a lot more on all the breaking news later tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern. Don Lemon tonight. We, of course, will be watching, as we do every night. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
Coming up, there's more breaking news. In the last hour for COVID-19 booster shots, as all adults here in the United States, 18 and older, are now eligible for an extra dose. More on that when we come back.
I look for the...
Right away if you have an allergic reaction.
Watching out for heading into tomorrow afternoon will be the chance for a few sprinkles, some flurries, nothing that's going to be sticking around, nothing that's going to be causing any travel issues. I want to stress that. Tomorrow morning, kind of early on, and again, it looks a lot more intimidating than what's actually going to be reaching the ground, at least according to this Futurecast computer model run here, but kind of giving you the idea. Still tomorrow afternoon, at least in parts of central and southern South Dakota, looking at a few of those flurries, a little bit of those sprinkles, again, nothing adding up, but we'll start to see see even another wave make its way through tomorrow evening, kind of right along and just south of I-90. This will be 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Again, not going to be a major concern. We will see sunshine by Sunday. Sioux Falls 10-day forecast showing temperatures slowly falling over the next few days down to the mid-30s by Monday. Heading into next week, good travel weather for Thanksgiving, although even after a warm-up on Tuesday and Wednesday, we will be cool.
Their strength and what they survived. Diane's special airs tonight on 2020, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here tonight. And when we come back this evening, we'll show you the new images out tonight of that tennis star missing. But the question, should the world believe them?
No one can deliver your mom's homemade short ribs.
I mean, Josh, do you think that what Juan said is accurate about the crossing state lines, about the use of the gun, about the use of self-defense based on the videos and the other evidence we had? What is your take of the result today?
Well, look, Shannon, I think if Democratic office holders were saying that the laws should be changed, that they would have a point. Like what Juan is saying may have some merit, politically speaking. But what I'm struck by is that even though Biden said the right thing today, I agree with Kim and saying that he urged the jury system's decision to be respected. You had the senator of Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, saying justice was not served. You had the House Democratic campaign arm saying that the verdict was disgusting and disturbing. You had Jerry Nadler, a prominent House Democrat, wanted a DOJ investigation into the verdict. I think what Juan was saying makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the gun laws. Let's talk about the vigilante laws. But that's not what we're hearing from a lot of prominent Democrats. And they're kind of being backed into this corner on the left, politically speaking, that I don't think will serve them very well if they're continually questioning the verdicts of juries that they disagree with.
Well, and I think Howie made a good point, as we talked about. If you watch this and you saw the evidence about when that gun was acquired, what the situation was, watch the video, I think it was very helpful to understanding how the jury came to that decision. And it's a benefit that in this country we can do that and watch our judicial system in action. Something else we're watching here in action is the House today passing this Build Back Better Act. It is going to be done in the House, but now it goes to the Senate. I want to play a little bit of the back and forth about how Senator Joe Manchin and possibly Senator Kyrsten Sinema will figure in the next steps.
I would hope that it's not just Joe Manchin that wants to see some changes to this bill. I think that Senator Sanders wants to see some changes on this bill. I think that certain changes on the Senate side can also be positive.
When the final bill comes out, CBO score comes out, then we'll go from there. Still looking at everything, absolutely.
We've been in close touch, as you all know, with Senator Manchin for several months now. That will continue. That can include answering questions he may have, hearing concerns he may have. We believe he's been operating and negotiating in good faith. That has been our experience to date.
Josh, but we also heard from Senator Sinema, who said essentially some of what's in that bill is not what she had conversations about and expected that the White House would do. She's a big part of this, too. What happens in the Senate?
Look, this is the first step. It's a big win for House Democrats that had trouble getting the squad together with the more moderate members like Josh Gottheimer. But not only is Joe Manchin still a very big question mark in whether he's going to support some type of legislation in the Senate, but what ends up coming out of the Senate may not be acceptable to progressives or even to some of the moderates. Like the SALT deduction is probably going to be taken out. I think that may be troublesome for some of the moderates in the House. So this is just the beginning of a process. I think it was a big victory that they got progressives and moderates on the same page in the House, but we've still got a long way to go. And Joe Manchin, I think his decision is far from made.
Juan, do you think he's persuadable? What do you think he'll be willing to go along with?
Well, I think the key here is that Senator Schumer, the majority leader in the Senate, and the White House have been working with Pelosi and Manchin all along. So it's not going to be an abrupt introduction to Senator Manchin. I think he has objections. You just heard Josh talk about the state and local tax provisions. I think that, he may have some problem there. But, overall, when you look at the cost of the bill, which had been his primary concern, given the CBO scoring, given the contrast to the bill that was passed by President Trump back in 2017 that had I think it was 10 times larger impact on the deficit, I think that they're in position now, and what I heard today is to try to get something done before the Christmas break.
All right, Kim, quick comment to you on this before we get to winners and losers.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure this is as big a victory because this was a messaging bill. Joe Manchin has said he's not even working off of it. So whatever comes up in the Senate, the House is going to have to vote on it again. And if you hold Joe Manchin to his word, in particular about not wanting any budget gimmicks in it, this whole bill was one big budget gimmick in terms of phase outs and how long the programs last. This bill may have really no future in the Senate. We'll just have to see if he stands by his ground.
Okay, Juan, kick us off on.
Visit Discount Tire, America's Tire, today.
This is Steve Harvey.
Tonight's On the Road segment is sponsored by Geico. Switch today and see all the ways you could save.
We love
bipolar depression.
I just couldn't find my way out of it.
Your lights. Patriot Lighting comes in a variety.
Triple Action Moisturizers.
Hi, I'm Steve.
I'm Lee.
For all of next year, don't miss the enrollment period deadline.
Like, there's a lot more things we need to be focusing on and that kind of crap. Anyway, my fallback thing is is not the biggest thing in the world, but it's about getting more women involved and getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing, which we had sort of given up on, but it actually happened to us, and it took many years for them to recognize us in this way. And we need to open the doors. We already have our list of women that need to be inducted, and we're going to work hard on that. And I mean, come on, guys, it's about time. You know, I'm the only second female drummer to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mo Tucker was first, and then Kathy, the bass player of the band, she's only the second. Now, there's something really wrong with that picture. I know this is not like, you know, big ass news for the world, but in my life, this is kind of important. And for women all around that do what I do. Come on, guys.
Hey, I appreciate that one, especially coming from your leadership and authority. And I happen to like a lot of the music stuff. I like going to the events when they do invite me. But I will just say, as Jay-Z said, you know, this might offend my political connects. And I will say maybe I'm offending some of them, but I'm with you on your side telling the judges at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and some of these other award shows to fall back, because it's wild to look at these creative fields that have had such diverse artistry and then see the judgments. Go ahead.
Oh, Jay-Z was in the front row there at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that's on tomorrow night. You know, I'm kind of blown away by the whole thing. I have to say, at first I didn't really care about it because they had neglected us, and I thought we should have been in a long time ago. Whatever. It's really kind of it's a beautiful thing when it happens, because you get to be among all your peers, and you know, there's crazy respect and love going around. But Jay-Z happened to be right in the front table there, and while we were playing, he was like doing this kind of thing. And I thought, all right, babe, that's really nice to see. We're all one. We are one big family. That's the way we should be. That's the way this whole world should be. But we're working on it.
I love that. Well, I love that. And one of your fellow Hall of Famers, which is kind of still a cool thing to say, even with the things that need to change, was Carole King. And she sent us, you know, she's been on the beat, great artist, also an environmentalist. She sent us a picture of her and Jay together, and it's, yeah, I mean, John, I know you love music too. I know you've been at Jazz Fest, John Stanton. I mean, these artists can really coexist.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that the Go-Go's aren't in. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am without having been listening to the Go-Go's in the 80s. I mean, it was a huge part of my life. It was a huge part of everyone's life. And, you know, I think there's been multiple generations, I guess we're getting that old now, of people that have been born who are musicians now, who were directly influenced by musicians like y'all, and yet, you know, they just pretend like, you know, it doesn't really matter. And I think it's crazy. It's good that that you guys and other women artists are starting to get recognized, but you know, a lot more needs to be done for sure.
And Gina, I have about four.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, go ahead.
Just what he said. When I hear something like that, it's hard to believe that we've had that sort of reach and influence on other people, because we're just this group of 5 girls that have just had this magical ride, love what we do, and it's just been incredible. And then I hear someone like Johnny saying, oh, it influenced him. I'm hearing that a lot these days, and it never gets old. I'm always so blown away when I hear it. I'm sorry, Ari, I could go on ever about this, but it's just been such a wonderful time for the band and for myself right now. And there's a lot of crap going on in this country, but time and place, we'll
I'll address everything when it, when we.
Yeah, and don't be sorry. This is why we invited you. I got 15 seconds left.
Thank you.
For any parents, watching with kids who want to be drummers, best advice for young drummers?
Do what you love to do, babies. Do what you love to do. And you may hear no many, many times, but it only takes one yes. That's the way it worked for me. That's work. And
good.
Determination, focus. It's possible. Hey, John, thank you, baby.
Love it. Hall of Famer Gina Shock, John Stanton, thanks to both of you. That does it for the beat tonight. It's Joy Reid's time now. Let me pass it on. I think Jason Johnson is in for Joy Reid, so it's still her time, but it's Jason I'm passing to. Hi, Jason.
In court today. Back in May, authorities say that Stebbins was drinking heavily and going 80 miles an hour over the speed limit when he crashed into a car, killing 2 high school students on their way home from work.
The crash sent 4 others to the hospital, including Stebbins. Today in court, we learned he hasn't fully recovered. Extreme speed, cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol. Court papers say they all played a role in this deadly Sioux Falls crash. Tayton Stebbins' blood alcohol was 0.22 when he's accused of running a red light, forever changing countless lives, including his own. Today in court, the prosecutor called Stebbins a danger to the community. She said he'd been in trouble before on the very same street. In 2020, police arrested Stebbins for going 60 miles an hour on East 10th Street. His blood alcohol was nearly twice the legal limit. A police report says he also had more than a pound of marijuana in his car. In that case, he received 5 years of suspended prison time. But when Stebbins' attorney spoke to the judge, he painted a much different picture of a man with traumatic brain injuries who spent the last 6 months in the hospital and rehab. Ross Wright told the judge that Tate Stebbins, who caused the accident, is not the same Tate Stebbins who stands before the court today. He's not driving, he has no ability or desire to drive, and requires 24-hour care. Wright says Stebbins doesn't remember the crash and was, quote, distressed to learn about the deaths and injuries sustained to others as a result of his actions. After hearing from both sides, the judge took a couple of minutes to think before setting bond at $50,000 cash assurity. That will make it easier for Stebbins' family to bring him home so he can get 24-hour care from a nurse. The prosecutor asked that he be monitored and tested for alcohol.
Well, figuring out how fast someone was driving in a fatal crash is a complicated process. There are a lot of factors to consider that involve physics, geometry, and Newton's laws on gravity.
We use it on pretty much every fatality accident we have.
Chad Gillen is a traffic officer with the Sioux Falls Police Department, but he's also part of the accident reconstruction crew.
A lot of it is based on Newtonian physics.
In other words, police are looking at the mechanical events that took place leading up to and after the crash. To find those, they can use 50 different formulas and equations based on different scenarios.
You can use the tire marks left on the skid to stop. You can use a formula to figure out that the speed from that.
They also use airborne equations, measuring how far a car vaulted in the air and where it landed.
You can also use momentum to figure out speed based on after the impact, how far did the vehicles slide to a stop.
Because a lot of today's vehicles are built with computers, police also use something called crash data retrieval.
That's where we use computers to go into the airbag control module, and we can download the information off the car.
That data tells you how fast the car was traveling, whether brakes were applied, and even how many degrees the steering wheel was turned. But even that information, Gillen says, still has to be cross-checked mathematically using those equations and formulas. If they come within a ballpark figure of about 5 miles an hour, they know how fast someone was driving. And Gillen says that it usually takes about 2 to 3 days for the reconstruction crew to determine a speed.
City and state leaders in Wisconsin are asking for safe and peaceful demonstrations following the not guilty verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. The 18-year-old was acquitted of 5 felony charges in the shooting deaths of 2 men and injuring a third during a night of violent protest in Kenosha last year. Rittenhouse started to shake, cry, and then fell to the floor as the jury finished reading the verdict. The parents of Anthony Huber, one of the men killed, said in a statement that today's verdict means there is no accountability for the person who murdered their son. President Biden says he stands by what the jury in the Rittenhouse case concluded. A law enforcement in Rapid City
And before the trial, his team had assembled 2 mock juries. One heard Rittenhouse's testimony, the other did not. Their reaction, he says, made the choice clear.
How important was it to put him on that stand?
It was the difference between an acquittal and a guilty.
If he'd been convicted of the most serious charge, first-degree intentional homicide, Rittenhouse faced life in prison. Tonight, he's a free man.
So, Gabe, the trial over. Do we know what's next for Rittenhouse?
Well, Lester, his lawyer says he'll probably move from the area. He's had 24-hour security since the incident. Meanwhile, this city had been bracing for a verdict for days, but tonight, so far, the scene here is calm and peaceful, Lester.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez in Kenosha, thank you. Tonight, millions more Americans are officially eligible for COVID vaccine booster shots after the FDA and the CDC gave the Pfizer and Moderna boosters emergency use authorization for all adults. And
we'll have your complete forecast coming up in just a few minutes.
Start with you. I know you were at the courthouse when this verdict came down. Tell us what you saw of reaction to it.
Well, it's a sharply divided reaction. You have people on both sides of the political aisle and both sides of the spectrum in terms of what they thought of Kyle Rittenhouse and whether or not he was guilty. There were some people who celebrated immediately. Some people drove by the courthouse honking horns, and there was a significant amount of people who were very upset and very angry when they heard the verdict. Those are the folks who are speaking out and probably demonstrating. I think there was a protest going on as we speak. So we're going to see a little bit more shouting and protesting over this violence here.
And Julius Kim, you are, as we said, a former prosecutor. Was this a hard case for the DA, for the prosecution to make?
Absolutely. I think that we could all tell that it was going to be a difficult case as the trial progressed, because we got to see some of the evidence ourselves. And when we put our eyes to the evidence and saw the videos in this case, we realized, whoa, there might be more to the situation than we were first aware of. The videos in particular showed Joseph Rosenbaum pursuing Kyle Rittenhouse right before that first shooting. And secondly, right before the Anthony Huber shooting and Gage Grosskreutz shooting, the videos showed Kyle Rittenhouse, for all intents and purposes, being attacked, not only by Anthony Huber, but by other people, and that he was in a vulnerable position when Gage Grosskreutz walked up to him with a handgun in his hand. And right there, I think all of us could tell that this was going to be a difficult case and that the state's witnesses weren't going to be perfect in this particular case.
And Gage Grosskreutz, of course, was the third individual who was shot and injured. He recovered and then testified at the trial. David Schaefer, I want to come back to you. There was a comment during the trial about the judge and what seemed to be his pointed rebukes of the prosecutor, of the district attorney in the case. What did you see about that, and what sort of reaction was that getting during the trial?
Well, there was a lot of people who thought that there was a lot of animosity, maybe not animosity, that's probably the wrong word, but there was a lot of tension in that courtroom between the judge and the prosecution. The judge clearly felt that the prosecutor went over the line in his questioning of Kyle Rittenhouse. And the folks outside of the courthouse believe that the judge was a little slanted in favor of Rittenhouse and the defense. I don't know that if you look at the record that's really true. My knowledge of the courts here in Wisconsin and really across the country is judges really do try to work hard to be fair to both sides. But he clearly felt that line of questioning was a little out of bounds and made his displeasure known. It would have been interesting to see, had there been a conviction on any of the counts, if the judge would have declared a mistrial as the defense had motioned for.
And Julius Kim, I don't know whether you have experience with the judge or not, but what was your take on the judge's handling of this case, and what were your expectations as you listened to the arguments?
Yeah, much ado has been made about Judge Schrader's rulings and some of the things he did in court. He played Jeopardy. He loves to tell anecdotes and tell little stories. But what I was looking at more and focusing more on were his legal rulings. And Judge Schrader's been around a long time. He's the oldest serving judge in the state of Wisconsin, and he does things his way, which is his prerogative. It's his courtroom, and he's entitled to have a certain personality. But in terms of the rulings themselves, I don't think anyone can debate or argue the fact that he is a thoughtful judge. That may be part of the critique, is that he tends to think aloud sometimes. But he gives both sides an opportunity to argue their positions. He always says, okay, state, do you have a response? Defense, do you have a response? And so some of the rulings might not everyone may have agreed with his rulings, but in the end, I thought that they were generally fair and there was some logic behind it. And this is just a matter of people not realizing that the judge has the power to make these decisions during the course of a trial, and he exercised them.
And Julius, Kim, just staying with you, we're now hearing comment, including from the parents of one of the victims, concern about whether this sets some kind of precedent, either officially or unofficially, to the rest of the country, that it's okay to bring a gun to a protest. From a legal standpoint, is there precedent here in some way?
I don't think there's any specific precedent as it relates to this case moving forward, but people tend to see verdicts like this as messages, and there are a lot of people, I imagine, that now feel emboldened to march right into a middle of a protest or a riot or whatever you want to call it with an AR-15 because they can. But I think that that's a dangerous thought process because this was a very, very unique case in that we had very specific facts in this case. We had video evidence showing exactly what precipitated the shootings in this case, and that might not happen in every situation. And so if people get the notion that they can show up to a protest with a long gun and that the law will somehow protect them as a matter of course, I think that would be a mistake.
And David Schaefer, back to you finally. You said earlier there's an expectation or a question about whether there will be protest today, tonight, into the evening. What do you know about that, and what are the expectations there in Kenosha?
Well, I do think this verdict, to some of the folks who have been involved in the protest movement here in Kenosha, have told me that they are a little bit more concerned than they were prior to this whole incident. That, yeah, there might be people out there with guns who might feel a little bit emboldened. Some people have told me they no longer feel safe in their own community. I think they do feel that they need to make their voices heard, and their voices need to be heard on a broader set of issues in terms of racial justice, in terms of equality of opportunity in a community like this. And Southeast Wisconsin has some of the widest racial disparities in the entire country, and they want to make their voices heard. They do want to get out there and protest, but there's a little bit of angst over that and what could possibly happen if violence does rear its ugly head here again.
Well, we certainly hope that's not the case, but I know that you and other reporters are going to be following this, and we certainly will be following what happens in the Kenosha area going forward. David Schaefer, thank you very much, and Julius Kim, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, lawmakers in the House of Representatives narrowly passed President Biden's massive Build Back Better legislation this morning after Republican leader Kevin McCarthy stalled the vote for more than 8 hours overnight. The sweeping social safety net and climate bill now goes to the Senate, where it will face further scrutiny. We'll have much more on this after the news summary.
And you said, I think it's a big mistake to draw that conclusion. Every case stands on its own. The specifics of the facts in that case, and anyone who looks at this verdict and says, well, now it's game on. Anyone can go do whatever they want with a gun and shoot up whatever they want. That is wrong, legally. Anyone who takes that position does so at their own risk. Every case rises and falls on its own facts.
All right, well, both of you, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, your analysis. Now, the reaction to Kyle Rittenhouse's not guilty verdict. It is still coming in. President Biden now speaking out, plus a new twist in the disappearance of the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai. Chinese state media releasing pictures they say are new. They claim to be her. America's former ambassador to China is my guest tonight. And the CDC now recommending booster shots for all adults in America.
On the eve of his 79th birthday, the White House physician released a summary of the tests and exams done today. While Mr. Biden is deemed fit and healthy, the president has a stiffened gait due to arthritic changes to his spine and ongoing acid reflux, which contributes to frequent coughing we've seen. Today's checkup made history. For 85 minutes, while the president was under sedation for his colonoscopy, he transferred authority to Vice President Kamala Harris, making her the first woman ever to briefly possess presidential powers. Lester?
All right, Kelly, thank you. In Charlottesville, Virginia, a jury is now deliberating a lawsuit against the organizers of the Unite the Right rally that erupted in violence 4 years ago and led to the death of a counter-protester. Pete Williams is following it for us.
A federal court jury is now deliberating after 4 weeks of testimony about the 2017 right-wing extremist violence in Charlottesville. It's a civil rights lawsuit filed by 9 people who say they were injured. 4 of them were hurt when a neo-Nazi drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters. The 24 defendants include some prominent white nationalists, including Richard Spencer, who coined the term alt-right, and Christopher Cantwell, who became known as the Crying Nazi because of his emotional video that he posted after he was sought for arrest in a separate incident. The case was brought under a 140-year-old law known as the Ku Klux Klan Act that allows private lawsuits against people who conspire to violate civil rights. Several of the defendants told the jury that, yes, they were violent, some even bragged about it, but they say there was no conspiracy and that their exchange of racist social media posts before the rally, some calling for violence, amount to protected speech. Lawyers for those who filed the lawsuit say each of them should be awarded at least $3 to $10 million in damages.
The damages that are sought here are sufficiently large to put the individuals and the groups that are accused into bankruptcy, to financially ruin those groups, to prevent them from engaging in this kind of action in the future.
The jury will likely deliberate several more days in a trial that could set a pattern for striking back at similar acts of violence in the future. Lester?
Pete Williams in Washington, thank you. After 46 years, there may be a break in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. A tip, reportedly from the son of a mafia associate, led the FBI to a former landfill in New Jersey where they collected evidence last month. NBC News has confirmed the FBI is looking for the body of Hoffa, the former Teamsters boss who disappeared in 1975. Up next tonight, the enormous financial toll for millions who must look after a spouse or partner in the cost of care.
Yes, so what I'm saying is people like options.
Booker strongly supported it. That is dead. And I want to also remind you, we talked about this judge, he is elected. He is a politician. He is an elected official in the state of Wisconsin. He wasn't appointed there. So a lot of this has to do with the other piece that she is attempting to work on, which is the vote. Is can people get access to the means by which you could replace this man? And also, do you bother? He ran unopposed the last time that he was put in that office. And the last thing I'll say is that we need to really zoom out. We want Kamala Harris to be all things to all people, right? It's her, she has to represent everything black. But she's not the only person responsible to do that. This system is not on her shoulders. She didn't create it. She's as much a victim of it and lives under it just like we do on this panel. It's not her job to fix it. This is a problem white America has to do, and they need to look inward and don't look for a black lady to come zooming in and on her white horse to fix it and to fix your feelings about it. Because the problem is, there's an LA Times reporter that talked about the fact that all the far-right groups, from the Proud Boys on, were just absolutely licking their chops today. They were acting like they won the Super Bowl, according to this Los Angeles Times reporter. Because what we need to worry about is that we have nothing in place legally. We have nothing in place culturally or socially to stop the next group of white nationalists, Proud Boys, MAGA people, whoever they want, to take from this verdict what they want and to use it as permission to attack Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter ain't just black people, as we just saw. Mr. Huber and Mr. Rosenbaum are white. They're Jewish. they are also victims and easily made victims, because anyone who supports Black Lives Matter should be very afraid tonight.
She was only president for a couple hours today. We can't expect her to fix everything. Joy Reid, thank you so much for letting me sit in the seat tonight. Paul Butler, Ellie Mistal, and Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you for joining us and starting off the show as well. And don't miss Politics Nation tomorrow. Rev has on Wanda Cooper-Jones, the mother of Ahmaud Arbery, and Jacob Blake Sr., father of Jacob Blake Jr. That's 5 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC. Up next on The Readout, why the Rittenhouse verdict is so ominous, what it could mean for the future of domestic terrorism in America. Plus, a historic vote in the House for President Biden's Build Back Better bill. But the fight for the president's agenda is just beginning. And while Democratic legislators are doing things like, I don't know, legislating, Republicans are focusing on rigging the system to their advantage. And Joe returns later to wrap up the week with tonight's absolute worst. You don't want to miss it. The Readout continues right after this.
No matter what.
That's bad policy, and it's one that I think that if
cuts, the child credit, ACA.
Ocasio-Cortez took to Instagram to mock.
Look at all of those different colored ties and haircuts. I have never seen a more diverse Republican Party than the one behind Kevin McCarthy right now.
McCarthy spoke until nearly 5:30 in the morning, at times thundering in opposition to the bill.
You're celebrating it when inflation is at a 31% hike. Gas prices, Thanksgiving, a border that in a few months breaks every record of the last 3 years combined.
Sizing up the tactic, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent Democrats home and pushed the vote until daylight, when she got her turn to speak.
And as a courtesy to my colleagues, I will be brief.
After a jab at her Republican rival's speaking time, Pelosi responded.
Much has been said on this floor, but the facts are these. Following the vision of President Biden, guided by the expertise and energy of our chairs, members, and staff, we have Built Back Better bill that is historic, transformative, and larger than anything we have ever done before.
In the end, Pelosi lost only one Democratic vote, Jared Golden of Maine. On Twitter, he said the bill offered too much help for some of the wealthy and could be better. Golden's concerns foreshadowed the next tricky Democratic fight straight ahead as the bill goes to the U.S. Senate.
And Lisa joins me now after a night of not much sleep. So let's talk about this. As you said, sweeping bill, $1.7 trillion. Let's break out some of the bigger pieces. Talk about what's the largest thing in here.
So excited to dig into this and explain it. At the top of the list of many large programs of this is child care. Combined, the child care and preschool programs together are $400 billion in this bill. Let's take people through that. So that's a big chunk right there. What they would do, this would offer voluntary free preschool for every child in America, ages 3 and 4, and also for the majority of families with kids up to age 5, it would cap their child care costs no greater than 7% of their income. That's a sea change. Now, one thing. States have to opt in to this program. It's a bit like Medicaid. So there's a question of which states would do it, which states would not. But Judy, this child care portion is on an Obamacare kind of scale, even larger than Obamacare potentially. If many states sign up, Republicans say that's a problem. They say it's a sweeping program, too much government, and they say it could hurt the child care industry if it's not done well.
So I'm going to have you break out another piece of this, and that's climate change. We know what a priority that is for Democrats. What does the bill do to address that?
Judy, this bill has climate change in almost every section. There are 55 at least different programs dealing with climate in this, but I want to talk about sort of overall some of the biggest items. Overall, this bill spends over $500 billion, $550 billion to be exact, on climate. There are tax credits in here for energy efficiency in your home, in your workplace, new kind of electric cars, even electric bicycles are in here. There is a limit on methane gas that would go into effect in 2023. There would be a cost to industries that emit too much methane gas under the current form of the bill. We'll have to see if this remains in it. Then there is also the Civilian Climate Corps. That's a big thing that Senator Bernie Sanders has wanted. Interesting, Judy, that would be young people doing climate projects across the country. It would be part of AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps' budget right now, $1 billion. The budget for this, $15 billion. It would make AmeriCorps a much larger industry, a much larger department. It would change the nature of what it does.
And focused on climate. So Lisa, this obviously comes with a price tag, and you were talking about that last.
With 3 medicines.
Sarah Schulte from Schulte Series.
John's new family pack in a pound for saving
consequences, because those men were race traitors, white men who had the audacity to protest that police shot Jacob Blake, a black man, in the back 7 times in his own car. They stood against the core conceit of white supremacy, that straight white men have dominion over everything, especially black bodies. And when you stand against that position, you can be subjected to the same violence used against Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, and yes, George Floyd. The Rittenhouse ruling isn't so much a warning to black America. Black folks have known the impact of white terrorism since we were first told that we were technically free-ish. It's a warning to every white suburbanite with a Black Lives Matter poster in their window, every white church youth leader chanting about George Floyd in front of the local Walmart, every white dad from Lorain, Ohio to Lubbock, Texas, who dares have a BLM sticker on their car. Those people now know that they too can be shot by a white 17-year-old with an AR-15 if he feels threatened by their desire to see America live up to its potential. Too many Americans think they have the complexion for protection against the same forces behind Charlottesville and the insurrection. But Kyle Rittenhouse and Judge Schroeder have just blown a hole in that belief. Only time will tell if enough Americans heed the warning shot that was just fired off. I'm joined now by Malcolm Nance, MSNBC counterterrorism and national security analyst, and Dean Obadiah, host of the Dean Obadiah Show on SiriusXM and an MSNBC columnist. Malcolm, I want to start with you. My primary concern about this ruling is that it is now open season and that white nationalists and domestic terrorists across this country are high-fiving. What kind of impact does a ruling like this have for everybody, from the Proud Boys to militia groups, from Savannah, South Carolina to Seattle, Washington?
Well, let me confirm for you that they are high-fiving, and they view this as a major victory. For some time, you know, the Free Kyle T-shirts and Kyle did nothing wrong types of T-shirts have been going on for have been inside the white supremacy movement and had mainstreamed itself into the Republican Party world. And by doing that, what they've done is that they have steeped Kyle Rittenhouse in the tea of white supremacy iconography, whether he wanted to be there or not. But what he did by his very action of going out, going to a protest across state lines, being within a group of armed men, performing what they call the Korean on the rooftop, right? Defending a position, whether it's a business or other, where they were not invited, and then getting into this fight where he killed 2 men and wounded a third. That is now the template on how to protest against Antifa or Black Lives Matter or any other person that they consider in the white supremacy world race traitors. You have to understand that for some time, these thoughts have been completely underground. They were not mainstreamed, but now they are. And worse yet, at some point, someone is going to weaponize the self-defense. And when I say weaponize it, I mean they are going to have a designated Kyle Rittenhouse. Yeah. And when you can anticipate or precipitate an attack, whether it's bottles thrown at you, then not only can that person go back and defend himself, others can turn their weapons and carry out a massacre and say it was in defense of another person. This is going to get out of control.
Yeah, this is all, you know, for those who remember, this is all basically Bernie gets, right? You're going looking for trouble, and then you're going to try and claim self-defense. You know, Malcolm talked about this idea of this getting mainstream. Dean, the thing that concerns me is not just the violence, not just what this says about democracy, but now you've got members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, doing whole tweet threads, offering this kid everything from internships to an opportunity to hang out with them at the house. You literally have members of Congress who are now saying, forget an application, forget being a candy striper, who cares about your grades, go out and kill people in the name of white supremacy, and you can get an internship in my office. Unpaid, of course. Dean, what the heck do we do about that?
This is part of the culture we're living in the GOP. You know, the GOP, this GOP has mainstream white nationalism. Now they're mainstreaming and celebrating political violence. Look at Jason, just days ago, those same members of Congress were defending Paul Gosar, who was one of the members of Congress you showed, who put out a video, this fantasy snuff video, where he is literally murdering AOC, and over 200 Republicans voted to defend Paul Gosar. This is the party led by Donald Trump, a man who incited the January 6th terrorist attack, which a poll in July from CBS showed 55% of Trump supporters, they don't view January 6th as an act of terrorism. They view it as an act defending freedom. I would submit they probably view what Kyle Rittenhouse did as an act defending freedom as well. And I'll tell you, Jason, as a lawyer, our criminal justice system is predicated on two things: punish and deter. You punish someone for wrongdoing to deter them and others. This is the opposite. This emboldens. It tells people, hey, if there's a Black Lives Matter movement protest in the next state, get your AR, drive over. If you fear anyone, kill them, go on the stand, repeat what Kyle did, cry on cue, and you walk. And everyone should be concerned. There's a gathering violence storm the GOP is seeding and nurturing. It's right in front of us. Red flags are going off. This is a scary time.
Transition to away from hydrocarbons.
Right around 30 degrees by 10 p.m. with the winds remaining pretty light. And in
offers the best opportunity to find a solution.
IOC buckles under the thought of losing business in China. The NBA buckles under the pressure. And here's the WTA saying enough is enough, standing up, doing what's right. When in the world do we see that anymore in sports? A major pro sports league or entity doing the right thing.
The WTA's bold stance against China winning praise from around the world.
We're at a crossroads, and it's time now to make the tough decision that you can't do business when the safety of your players are at risk.
For the international tennis community, some things are more important than money.
Chinese censors are clearly hoping that they can censor away this whole controversy. But the outrage is growing. The questions are growing. They can't make this go away. And Aaron, your interview last night with Steve Simon only puts the pressure on further on Beijing to provide answers to the world and to put Peng Shuai in a position where she can actually speak for herself. Sending a few photos with these bizarrely happy captions with the firestorm happening. Either she is isolated completely and not being told and unaware of what's going on, or she is not being allowed to speak her truth. This is what people believe, Aaron, and these efforts on shows like yours to just keep putting this story out there are going to continue to hang a cloud over Beijing, even, you know, as the Olympics are getting closer.
All right. Well, thank you very much, reporting from Taipei. You know, and it is important here to emphasize, you know, like Will is saying, you know, Peng Shuai lives in the same world we live in. You know, she has a cell phone. She has communications with people. She's not responded to the WTA. She's not responding to all these people reaching out to her. She lives in the same world we live in, right? All we're getting is these pictures that a Chinese journalist is putting online saying, oh, look, she's fine. She can speak for herself. So for more on this, I want to bring in Max Baucus, former U.S. ambassador to China during the Obama administration. And Ambassador, look, you understand this so well. So you spent years in China. You understand how this country operates. Do you think there's any chance Peng has actually willingly recanted her incredibly serious allegations and is happily snuggling with her cat and not answering her phone?
Probably not. The government wants this to go away. There are several ways they can make this go away. One is what they're attempting to do thus far, that is censor. Just try to keep it out of the news, and hoping that not only Chinese people, but the world community that doesn't follow this anymore. That's one way for it to go away. That's not going to work. It's only going to go away when the government realizes, hey, they got a big problem on their hands, and even though the alleged rapist is a former very high government official, that they're going to have to bring him to justice in some way, at the very least show to the world that that Peng Shuai is safe, she's okay, and also it's very important that justice be done.
So let me ask you, sorry, I know just a little bit of a hit here on our connection, but you know, they had put out an email. Actually, the head of the WTA received the email, and it was, you know, very formal from her, recanting what she said. He then wrote back to the email. She hasn't responded to that or anything else. But he saw the email reported by Chinese state media before he shared it with anybody, just so everyone understands what's really going on here. Ambassador, you met with Chinese leaders, and this is really significant because you met with the former vice premier, Zhang Gaoli. That is the man Peng is accused of sexually assaulting her, of rape. We know very little about him, but you have met him. What can you tell us about him?
Well, not much is really known about him. The Chinese Communist Party keeps things very, very much under wraps. He's kind of stone-faced. I've met with him several times, dealt with him several times. He's poker-faced. He has been very much involved in business matters and construction matters in China. Basically in eastern China, also in the western part of the country. And but when you try to talk to him, he plays it by the book. He does not volunteer very much. He's a very, very hard person to read. He's not going to win any Mr. Personality contest, I'll tell you that.
Wow.
Frankly, among people I've known in China, he is at least Mr. Personality.
Wow, which is okay. So now, you know, Peng obviously has not been seen publicly since making that explosive allegation. And I just want to point out to everyone watching that China has done this to really prominent people. It is amazing, and they have gotten away with it, right? I mean, Alibaba founder Jack Ma, right? The household name to most people watching. He went missing for 3 months after he criticized China's financial system. And now he's out there and cowed. Prominent actress Fan Bingbing vanished from public view for nearly a year after a massive tax evasion scandal. Xiao Jinhua, a billionaire financier, was seized from a Hong Kong hotel in 2017. He has not been seen since. Real estate mogul Rin Jichong went missing last March after criticizing China's COVID response, has now been sentenced to 18 years in prison for corruption. And Ambassador, as you know, I'm just giving, you know, a very small sampling. You know firsthand how this goes. I mean, they have been able to do this with impunity.
Well, not quite impunity, because it very much tarnishes their reputation in the world community. And China is aware of that. It's a problem they're facing. That is, they want total control. They want to bring in people, detain people indefinitely. But they know that if they're high-profile people, that they're going to face a huge reputational cost in so doing. So they've got a problem on their hands. I think the answer to all this, frankly, is for the world community to stand up as the Women's Tennis Association has. And the more that continues, the more finally China's going to realize it's got to be, if it's going to be part of the world community, it's got to be, it has to adopt the standards that the rest of the world community has as well.
Well, Ambassador, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I think there's one thing we all know, and that is that China did not expect the WTA to stand up the way it is. They probably expect them to sound more like the IOC, but no, the WTA truly doing something remarkable. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
You bet.
And this weekend on CNN, Fareed Zakaria takes an in-depth look at China's leader, China's iron fist, Xi Jinping, and the stakes for America. That airs Sunday night at 9. And out front next, the White House just releasing details of President Biden's first physical in office, what it reveals about the oldest first-term president in U.S. history, and a major step for Biden's sweeping spending plan. The celebration may be short-lived as that bill now heads to the Senate.
Takes an inside look at a system that notifies victims on the current status of their offenders. That story after the break.
Dakota struggled with his health, holding down a job, and meeting basic needs.
When you got out, what kind of support did you get?
I had none whatsoever. No support whatsoever. Get my driver's license, Social Security card, filling out paperwork and stuff. I was lost.
Amron's depended on help from people like Sean to keep the lights on and keep the refrigerator stocked.
He's food insecure, for crying out loud. That's wrong. You know, if I don't periodically take him to the grocery store, you know, he'll call me up and say, I don't have anything. I haven't eaten in a week.
Across the country, the support and compensation exonerees are eligible for differs drastically depending on where they're convicted. 37 states and the District of Columbia have laws for compensating exonerees in some way, but qualifying for and accessing that support is another story entirely. In Missouri, one of the states that has a law on the books, Joe Amrine and Ricky Kidd don't qualify for help because they weren't exonerated through a specific mechanism involving DNA evidence.
You can count on one hand the number of people who have qualified for support under Missouri's compensation statute. He would be better off if he had been guilty and then released on parole, because a parole officer would help him get public assistance and would constantly be on the lookout for job leads. And
he would be better off if he had actually done the crime. He'd have more support coming out.
He would be better off if he had done the crime and been released on parole, yeah.
Yeah, I'm mad. I'm still mad. You know, I'm really mad, and I'm gonna stay mad. Till the day I die, I'll probably be mad because they took my life.
So far, Ricky Kidd's experience after prison has been very different than Joe Amrine's, and he counts himself lucky.
For the first time, I felt bitterness towards the state.
But the trauma, the loss, the anger, many of those are the same. Kidd recently began seeing a therapist to work through those issues. He's currently suing the Kansas City Police Department in civil court, which could take years. Because of governmental immunity, Sean O'Brien says most clients get nothing. In the meantime, he's trying to focus on the positive each day, advocating for the friends he left behind, the wrongful convictions he can prevent, and redefining what freedom means.
These are things that I always wanted to happen, and now they happen. So,
not wasting a day.
Not wasting a day.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz in Kansas City, Kansas.
And you can learn much more about Ricky Kidd's life and case in our podcast, Broken Justice, and about the failures in public defense that led to his incarceration.
Primatene Mist is clinically shown
middle-class tax cut. And of course, it does also make the wealthiest in our society pay their fair share so that everyone can live in dignity. This is going to reduce the cost of health care, also the cost of child care, and of course, it makes pre-K universal. It extends the child tax credit. And this is something that creates millions of good-paying union jobs over the course of the next decade. We've got to be talking about this and so much more nonstop. And of course, we cannot forget that we passed just 2 weeks ago the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is also a significant achievement for this president and for this Democratic Congress. Our roads, our bridges, and our highways have been in need of repair for more than a generation. And people are going to see the results of that once-in-a-lifetime investment in their local communities.
Congressman Mondaire Jones, thank you so very much for your time. I think this is a great bill. You need to get like Pharrell to come up with like a BBB song or something that you can sell. I think you guys can make this work. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Republicans ramp up their assault on America's elections with a new push to get rid of a bipartisan elections agency and maybe even send its members to jail. We'll be right back with that after this break on The Readout.
Except Trudeau, but he doesn't really count as a leader. So all in all, Kamala and her team consider this a successful trial run. Here's what Sleepy Joe had to say when he woke up.
What must be what?
Joining me now is Lynn Patton, Save America's senior advisor, and Tommy Lahren, host of No Interruption with Tommy Lahren. Tommy, can you believe crooked didn't become president? Kamala got there first?
Oh, she is somewhere incredibly upset about that. But I'll tell you, today, 85 horrifying minutes. It would have been even more horrifying if we didn't have our current president, Sleepy Joe Brandon Biden, at the wheel. So a real Sophie's choice there. But I'll tell you, Jesse, those 85 minutes that she spent playing president today, well, that was more time that she spent, I don't know, at our southern border, finding those green new jobs, or any of her actual vice presidential duties, maybe besides going to the yarn shop or the bakery. Of course, that was official business. But all in all, her 85 minutes as president were as uneventful as her 10-plus months as vice president, where she has done absolutely nothing.
Lynn, as a woman, do you feel any sort of pride at all about this glass ceiling being shattered, even though it was shattered because the president was having his colon checked?
I mean, look, Jesse and Tommy, you guys hit the nail on the head. When your approval rating is an abysmal 28%, is it any wonder that Kamala's only pathway to the presidency is literally through Joe Biden's colon? I mean, it's no wonder that the lamestream media has to celebrate this faux 85 minutes because, as Tommy said, she's being openly sidelined by the White House. Her staff is quitting. She's speaking in faux French accents. She is cackling inappropriately, and she's failing at the one job that she has been assigned, which is to stop the influx, or rather invasion, of illegal immigrants at the border. And look, if I were a Democrat, I'd be more concerned with the fact that 40% of Americans think Joe Biden is in good health. A staggering 61% of Americans do not want him to run again in 2024. Meanwhile, recent polls confirm that Trump would trounce both of them by upwards of 15% if an election were held today. And as we saw in Virginia and Ohio and countless flipping blue counties, you know, Trump's America First platform is still strong, it's winning, and it's what the American people want to see.
Tommy Lahren, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I'll just...
There's also quite a rush to judgment the first 24 hours or so this happened. There were a lot of things said about, oh, this young man was a Trump supporter. We read that. He had been at a Trump rally, and then a few months later, this happens, as though there's a connection between those two things. Once the evidence came out, once we began to see video of what happened, it became very, very clear there's a different narrative here than the narrative we heard at first. And the jury, you know, I've covered trials. Anyone who's covered trials understands it doesn't matter how much you read in the media. It doesn't matter how much of a trial you watch on television. When you're a jury or you're sitting in that courtroom watching a trial, you have a different perspective of what's going on. And that jury reached a verdict. There's an old saying, and I've seen it going around today from judges and lawyers, justice is a process, not an outcome. So the process happened, justice was done, and in that the process happened. People will always disagree on verdicts. In this case and every other case, depending on which side you're on, but justice was done because the process happened.
I would say in response, I'm not surprised by the verdict because of the instructions from the judge, because of Wisconsin law and the law as it pertains to self-defense. I read parts of the statute and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, you know, if I were on that jury and this was the evidence that was presented to me and I take my role as a juror seriously, what else am I left to do? But that's not an indictment of the jury, that's an indictment of the law. That is an indictment of, I think, of society in that you can, to your point, take the video and a different narrative shows up. But that then requires you to live in a silo and not take into account why on earth was he there in the first place? Right. And he shouldn't have been there. And so while, sure, great, on the law, he should have been released, but that's not how people live. People don't live in silos. And that's why I think people are like, sort of outraged by this verdict.
And what we heard the former Milwaukee prosecutor saying earlier in the program, there's concern that this may send a message that it's okay to carry a gun to a protest.
Yeah, well, it's not. And you shouldn't do that. And I'm sure, I'm going to guess that if he had to do it over again, how many of us at 17 make bad decisions? And fortunately, most of the time they don't turn out this way, that bad. but I'm betting he wouldn't do it again. I would hope he wouldn't do it again.
Well, a tragic thing, no matter which side you're on, no question. Build Back Better, Jonathan. The House of Representatives, where did I come up with that term? House of Representatives passed it today after weeks and weeks and months of discussion and debate. Two completely different stories here. The Republicans say it's socialism. Democrats say this is such important additional help for raising children, for education, for health care, for the climate, for climate change, fighting climate change. Which one is it?
Oh, obviously, it is what the Democrats are saying. You know, leave aside what the Republicans are saying. They'll brand anything socialism, and they don't bring anything to the table as an alternative, as a positive alternative to what the Democrats are presenting. What the House of Representatives did today by passing Build Back Better was to put down a marker and show the American people what Congress wants to do for them. Everyone's talking about the economy and inflation and costs are so high, and yet you look at Build Back Better and there's an opportunity to bring down your child care costs, to bring down your home care costs, to bring down your health care costs. That's what Congress should be doing. That's what Washington should be doing, looking at the problems of the country, looking at the problems of the American people and the American worker and American productivity and doing something about it. And so with the House passing it, they've sent a message. Look, this is the package. Of course, it's just the House. And all the action goes to the Senate, where this might be, Build Back Better might be a shadow of its former self by the time it comes out of the Senate. But there should be unadulterated joy that Democrats have been able to do this at this point in time right now.
Unadulterated joy.
Well, I'll adulterate it a little bit. This is a classic example of the different attitudes between, the role of government. And the infrastructure bill that was passed earlier, the $1.2 trillion, is the role of government. For a lot of people, that's how they look at it. That's how a lot of Republicans used to look at it. Now, beginning last year, we've talked about this before. Under Trump, there was a lot of an abandonment of this traditional Republican attitude about the role of government, because Trump wasn't afraid to spend money. He wasn't afraid to give tax cuts and then turn around and also spend money on top of the tax cuts. He was all for infrastructure. But what you're hearing today is the infrastructure bill was one thing, but now this is I won't use the word socialist tonight, I'll just call it a very progressive wish list of things that progressives believe government should do. It's the biggest expansion of government. It compares right there with the LBJ Great Society, the FDR New Deal. It's right there, and that's what Joe Biden, if that's what he wants his legacy to be, we'll see how voters feel about it. But to get down to the $2 trillion price tag, 1.8, whatever we want to call it, they've played some tricks. They've got several things in here they're touting that will sunset out very quickly. In 4 years, the preschool, the child tax credit, the health care expansion, and if there's a Republican Congress, really doubtful they're going to re-up this. So a lot of things that are being celebrated on the left may actually not last very long.
So this may be ephemeral.
It may be, it may not. Remember, folks were really angry about the Affordable Care Act, and Republicans ran on replace and repeal. And when they had the majorities in both the House and the Senate, they didn't replace or repeal anything. So,
they did get rid of the individual mandate.
Sure, but in Washington, the hardest part is getting something into law. It's hard to get stuff into law, and it's even harder to pull it out, especially if it's popular, and especially if it helps people.
No, that's a good point, and so it depends on how America reacts to it, how Americans react to it over the next couple of years. You're right. If this all becomes very popular, it'll be difficult. More difficult than it sounds, even if Republicans take over to reverse it.
Are there any parts of this bundle of programs that Republicans can be comfortable
I don't think so. If you're talking about congressional Republicans,
right?
I don't think so, and that was evidenced by the vote in the House. And I think you'll probably see a very similar vote if in the Senate. This comes down to Joe Manchin Kristen Sinema. Yeah.
Right, and that, remember, the Build Back Better, when it gets to the Senate, the Republicans made it clear, we're not voting for this, whatever you come up with, and that's why it's going to be voted on by a simple majority through reconciliation rules.
Right. Yeah.
So that's why they're able to do all this negotiating, not worrying about what Republicans think, because they've already said, we don't care.
And why immigration may come out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't care, and it's a shame, because, you know, I heard Speaker Pelosi today, after the House vote, they were talking to her about Kevin McCarthy's long marathon 8-hour speech and what he had to say, and she said, I don't pay attention to I don't listen to them, and that's a shame.
We'll leave it there. Okay. Gary Abernathy, Jonathan Capehart, thank you both.
Thanks, Judy.
And online, right.
And competition investment package. It's stalled in the House because of lawmaker disagreement on whether to vote on what the Senate passed or write a new version. The bill would unlock $54 billion to incentivize U.S. semiconductor production and research. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, just 12% of semiconductors are made in the U.S., down from 37% in 1990. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo recently highlighted the seriousness of the chip shortage and called on the House to send legislation to the president's desk.
The lack of domestic production in America of semiconductors poses not only an economic threat, a national security threat, and we need Congress, the House, to pass the CHIPS Act, or USICA, as quickly as possible so that we can get to the business of making more chips in America.
This week, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a joint statement the two chambers will go to conference committee to iron out their differences over the legislative package. No exact timeline was given. In Washington, I'm David Aid.
Austin's back with a final check of the forecast when we return.
Get the latest news now, every weekday morning on Dakota News Now.
You can soften stools with no stimulants for comfortable relief.
TracFone Wireless gives you unlimited carryover. Raymond.
You know, Jesse, look, you got to focus on the children when you're talking about Santa. We have a Santa deficit in this country, like so many things in the country. We don't have enough of them. They can't hire enough Santa helpers. And look, there's only one Santa Claus, so he has a lot of helpers to go to malls, to visit kids at parties. Here's the real problem. I don't have a problem with Old Navy allowing or trying to encourage new helpers that look different from our traditional view of Santa. Truth is, St. Nicholas was a Greek who served as a bishop in Turkey, so he probably didn't look like Tim Allen or that Coca-Cola ad. It's like the old Andy Williams song. Some children see him brown and bronze, some see him lily white. It's up to families. Whatever Santa helper they're happy with, I'm happy with.
And we want the elves to be diverse as well, so that's very important.
I agree.
Joe Biden pardoned a couple of turkeys today, and he had some strict requirements for peanut butter and jelly.
And eventually, peanut butter and jelly were selected based on their temperament, appearance, and I suspect vaccination status. Yes, instead of getting basted, these two turkeys are getting boosted.
Wait, so you're saying these turkeys were boosted, they were double vaxxed, so that's why he pardoned them?
You know, Jesse, jokes tell us insights that otherwise might elude us.
So the woman you just saw in that clip, Jill Tarter, she joins me now. She's the chair emeritus of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Research, and your work was depicted in the movie Contact. Happens to be my absolute favorite movie of all time. Your character was played, of course, by Jodie Foster. It was an inspirational, sort of a life-changing movie for me. I loved it. So, Jill, I'm so honored to get to talk to you as a person who inspired that and has spent your life on this. So, how confident are you that the Webb telescope will find not just life on other planets, which I know would be a huge breakthrough just to even, have proof of some sort of bacterial organism of any sort. I get that, or water. But what about complex, intelligent life like ours?
Well, JWST is really not set up to find intelligence or technologies. But what it will perhaps allow us to do for some of these nearby exoplanets, planets orbiting other stars, is to look at the composition of the atmospheres of those exoplanets and determine whether there's any chemistry that would indicate biology on the surface of the planet. he probably won't be able to tell whether that biology is intelligent enough unless somehow they're manipulating the chemistry in the atmosphere to blink a Morse code. But we will be able perhaps to learn about whether life exists beyond the Earth. And that, in fact, is really exciting.
And deeply profound. I mean, you've dedicated your entire career to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. What does this mission mean to you? Do you feel that it's finally, within your grasp?
Well, the fact that we will be able to interrogate nearby exoplanets is really stunning and exciting. There has been so much technology that was required to be developed to make this telescope work that it's taken a great deal of time, and it will be able to do things that other telescopes can't. Looking for intelligent life, looking for what we call technosignatures, we tend to use other ground-based telescopes. But Webb could show us life on a nearby planet, and that would be stunning.
It would be, and I know that emphasis on just the word near, right, is so crucial. Well, Jill, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and talking with me. I can't wait to watch this. I hope everybody does. The Hunt for Planet B, tomorrow night, Saturday night at 9 o'clock, right here on CNN. Thanks so much for joining us. It's time now for Anderson.
Talking to Stephen Miller, Chris Christie, Ben Shapiro, Dana Lash. Tucker Carlson is up next.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, a significant day in the recent history of the country. We're going to have an hour of details for you, but before we jump into them, a little bit of context. Here's how the story started, just so we all remember. 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse wound up on the street in Kenosha in the first place with a gun for one reason. He was there because in the summer of 2020, the leadership of the Democratic Party endorsed mob violence for political ends. That's why there were riots in Kenosha that night, because people like Kamala Harris supported those riots. More than a year later, as Rittenhouse stood trial for murder, those very same people implied there would be more violence if he was acquitted. So imagine being a juror on that case. Imagine the pressure and the fear. It would take enormous moral courage for any juror to ignore the threats and follow the evidence to its logical conclusion. So much courage that at times we doubted it was even possible in a country as politicized as ours now is. But as we learn today, it is still possible, thank God. This afternoon, the jury acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse on all charges. The jury affirmed what was obvious from the very beginning. He acted in self-defense. It was a wonderful moment. Anyone who believes in impartial justice was vindicated. Here's what that moment looked like.
He wishes none of this would have ever happened. But as he said when he testified, he did not start this.
The prosecutor responding, "While we are disappointed with the verdict, it must be respected." The family of one of the victims, Anthony Huber, saying, "We are heartbroken and angry."
We love you, Hannah.
Huber's girlfriend spoke outside the court.
We know that this system is a failure. I think the question that most of us are feeling right now is, what can we do next?
The governor has called for calm as a small crowd in Kenosha continues to react to the news.
That young man is a man among men.
A spokesman for the Rittenhouse family echoed the plea for peace.
The family calls for calm. I mean, this was not an injustice.
The unanimous decision did not come swiftly. Weighing a life sentence for 18-year-old Rittenhouse, the jury deliberated for almost
down the government. They refused to play ball on a number of key issues like the budget. They made Boehner's life a living hell. They also caused tremendous substantive damage to the country by imposing austerity that immiserated millions. Eventually, after a few years of pushing, the base won. They ran Boehner out of the job entirely. Not to worry, that Boehner guy was old news anyway. There had to be a better way.
There is a better way, and the new team is ready to bring America back. Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, joined by common sense conservative candidates from across the country. Together, they are ready to make history. Together, they are the Young Guns.
That's right, Republicans. The Young Guns will save you from the old guard. Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, Kevin McCarthy were here to rescue the party from despair. So, where did all those guys end up? Well, famously, Cantor was the first and so far only House Majority Leader in history to lose his primary. He lost to a Tea Party guy named Dave Bratt, who ended up eventually losing the seat himself to a Democrat, Abigail Spanberger, who still holds it to this day. And Paul Ryan, well, he fulfilled his wunderkind potential, became Speaker of the House just 45 years old, and he managed to pass the wildly unpopular Trump tax cuts for corporations and the rich. But much like Boehner, Ryan struggled to hold together a fractious coalition, failed to accomplish any other conservative priorities like repealing Obamacare or slashing entitlements. Remember, they fell on their face twice trying to repeal Obamacare. And just after a little over 3 years, he quit to help run Fox News and bring in that sweet, sweet cash. That brings us to California Republican Kevin McCarthy. Now, he is the current House Minority Leader who hopes to be the next Speaker of the House. He very well could be. Unlike Boehner, who worked his way up through leadership for years, or Paul Ryan, who is a kind of breakout star within his party, widely respected for his intellect, even ran on Mitt Romney's vice presidential ticket, Kevin McCarthy is just kind of there. And I gotta say, just
who was the first person, by the way, who was killed that night by Kyle Rittenhouse. The jury deciding that indeed on all 5 counts, Kyle Rittenhouse is not guilty and is a free man tonight. Anderson?
Sarah Seidner, appreciate it. By the way, in the intro, I said Jacob Blake was killed by police. That's inaccurate. He was shot and partially paralyzed. Joining us now, senior legal analyst Laura Coates, CNN political commentator Van Jones, CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Paul Callan, and CNN chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. Jeff, are you surprised at the verdict at all, given how this case unfolded?
Not really. I think this was always a tough case for the prosecution. I thought the reckless endangerment case was the strongest one, the least serious count. The unfortunate message of vindication and making a hero of Kyle Rittenhouse is appalling, but the actual verdict in this courtroom based on this evidence is a defensible one, I think.
Sarah Seidner's, you heard Sarah Seidner's report. The jury returned a full verdict today. The whole argument of his which seems to be the prosecution argument, which was by his very being there, he was provoking things, and therefore the self-defense doesn't apply, but clearly the jury said they didn't buy that.
And there were problems with the prosecution theory. Think of the 3 people that he shot. Rosenbaum chased him.
Right. One of them was attacking him with a skateboard.
The other one attacked him with a skateboard. The third, the one we saw in Sarah's piece, pulled a gun on him. Those are potential grounds for self-defense. That is not a terrible self-defense case, and that's what the jury believed.
Laura, how much do you think the defense prevailed versus the prosecution failed here?
Well, the prosecution, because they have the burden of proof and the burden of persuasion, has to be noted to have failed. But remember, a lot of the defense witnesses came in. Of course, Kyle Rittenhouse was the person who was the most compelling. But as Jeffrey noted, the person who was the sole survivor of this particular altercation actually was a government witness. But his testimony inured to the benefit of the defense because he presented some compelling reason by which someone could reasonably believe that Kyle Rittenhouse thought he was in fear of his life. And remember, this comes down to the jury instructions. I know it was by far, for so many, the most boring aspect of any trial or a jury trial, and certainly in watching them all unfold. But the jury instructions is what actually, I think, dictated this particular verdict. Remember, on the self-defense notion, they were instructed they had to view it not through the hindsight of who they are sitting today objectively, but instead through someone who has an ordinary intelligence and somebody who was in Kyle Rittenhouse's position, judging it that way. And as far as the notion of whether
was proof that our judicial system is not, quote, equitable, whatever that means. It needs to be changed. The Attorney General of the state of New York said it needs to be completely torn down and rebuilt, our justice system that we've had for 250 years. It's the best thing in our country. The idea that you are tried on the basis of the facts, not on the basis of what you look like. But they'd like to change that.
Worse and harder from here on out, almost certainly. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries in New York is the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, and he joins me now. Congressman Jeffries, there were some tense moments in your caucus between various factions and divisions over the last month about the holdup on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. There were times where the leadership said we're going to have a vote, and then it didn't happen because the votes weren't there.
Tonight, if there are any protests in Kenosha, they were pushing for peace tonight.
And Brian, we know the Wisconsin governor called in the National Guard in the anticipation of the verdict and that things potentially lead to more unrest that we have seen. You're there tonight. Any indication that there are problems tonight?
No indication of that at all, Marnie. There's basically no protesters outside the courthouse tonight. It's been very, very calm. The concern among the people in Kenosha that we've spoken to, the people who live here, is they are worried that there could be outsiders that would come in late tonight. The sheriff told us that they are ready for that. They have teams ready to go, and you mentioned it. The National Guard also has a team on standby just in case.
Brian Enton. Brian, thank you. We'll be bringing you back. Stand by for that. Kyle Rittenhouse says that he opened fire because he feared for life, and in the end, an argument of defense would mean that he would walk away a free man. Why this case could have played out much differently in a state other than Wisconsin? We're going to dig into that next here on News Nation Prime.